Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com. Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 11, The Trump Legacy. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen. How you doing today, Sam?
Doing good. It's been a little bit of a while since we've done a podcast, but looking forward to another great show.
Yeah, we took a little time off over the holidays to redo the studio and so forth. In the process, we have a new president. So I thought it would be interesting. We had originally discussed doing a podcast on the insurrection on January 6th. And I thought that was probably, while it was a worthwhile topic, it might be a little too focused. I think it would be probably more interesting and more helpful to look at the Trump legacy in a more general sense. I don't want to, I'm trying to be as fair and impartial as possible. I don't want to just look at the negative stuff from Trump. And I think the insurrection reflects very poorly on him. So today we're going to look at what some of his notable accomplishments were over the last 4 years. We'll look at some of his failures. And then we'll have kind of an open discussion about what the lasting effects of Donald Trump on the U.S., the world, the presidency, and so forth are. And then just a candid talk about where we think the future is under Joe Biden for the next 4 years. So, ready to get into it? All right. So, I wasn't even going to do the plugs because I think this is going to be a long podcast. We'll do the plugs at the end of the show. Notable accomplishments. I kind of broke these down into a couple of key ones that came out of the whitehouse.gov website prior to the changeover. And the first one, and one that I think really is probably the biggest, is the reshaping of the federal judiciary. So everyone knows that Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices that are life terms, but he also appointed 220 judges to lower courts, which are all lifetime appointments as well. 25% of U.S. Circuit Court judges were Trump that are in place today were Trump nominees. And Trump's influence as a result of that will live on through the judiciary for the foreseeable future. Do you think that is a good thing, a bad thing, indifferent thing? What are your thoughts?
I think it depends on what these judges are going to be ruling on in the coming years. And especially since it's impressive as a president to be able to do that in only 4 years to appoint that many judges and 3 Supreme Court justices as well. So whether or not they're going to, the judges will, rule on certain things in the coming years, it's still, it's something that'll be in a history book looking back at the presidency of one of his accomplishments.
Absolutely. And I think the one thing that we've seen so far is the 3 Supreme Court justices did not tip the balance of power in the Supreme Court at this point in time, given the number of cases that Trump brought to the Supreme Court during the election phase that did not go in his favor. So I think, if nothing else, the impartiality of the Supreme Court seems to still be intact, which is a good thing. The next thing that we look at is Space Force. Space Force is the first new branch of the U.S. military since the U.S. Air Force was created from the Army Air Corps after World War II. It's supposed to be a more centralized version of the military missions in space. Now, that's not fighting aliens or anything like that. What they do is they handle satellite surveillance. They handle all the military satellites. They're responsible for the GPS system that's both civilian and military use. They're monitoring the various debris that's in space to make sure that it's not dangerous to future missions. What do you think? Do you think, I'll be honest with you. When I heard that we were creating Space Force, I couldn't help but chuckle.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't the only one, because it spawned a Steve Carell comedy series, that came out of this. What are your thoughts on Space Force?
Well, I think space exploration is important. And I know over the years, the public has sort of waned away from that, and there's not as much interest as there was like in the 80s and 90s and stuff. I do think if Space Force is going to actually do something, and it's not just a dumping ground for money like a lot of other of these types of programs, they spend a lot of money, especially when it comes to the military. There's a lot of money put into that. But I think if they do monitor things like the debris around the Earth, which is getting really, it's becoming a real problem, and satellites and things like that, I think that's a good start. And maybe they'll segue into actual exploration missions in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, we don't really know what direction they're going in right now. They really inherited a lot of things that the Air Force had already been doing. They're not doing exploration at this point. Yeah. That is still the domain of NASA. But, we have missions up there. You have an International Space Station up there that occasionally needs to be moved so it doesn't get hit by a refrigerator-sized piece of debris that brings it down. So that's really what they're working towards.
And you also have private companies like SpaceX that are going a lot more in, they have a little bit more of a budget than NASA does for the funding. So they're able to do a lot more missions into space.
Sure. Yeah. In fact, speaking of space junk, one of the things that's really starting to crowd the low Earth orbit are these new internet-enabled satellites. SpaceX, Elon Musk is putting a huge constellation of satellites, some 400 or 500 satellites up there, all of which are moving obstacles that are flying at 17,500 miles an hour. So it's not a small job monitoring that stuff for safety. What's the next thing that we have?
So next up, we have the tax reform. It was the biggest overhaul of the nation's tax code in 3 decades. It slashed corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%. Some critics argue it was a windfall for massive corporations at the expense of the middle class. Administration officials predicted GDP boost by 3 to 6%.
Now, we haven't seen the GDP boost that they expected so far. However, I can say, at least in my experience, that slashing of the corporate tax was enough of an incentive for my company to give more back to its employees. I think my company is an exception to that rule. I think a lot of companies take that as a windfall and they absorb the profit themselves. Right. This kind of goes back to the early 80s with Reagan economics of trickle-down economics, where, give the rich people more money and then it'll trickle down to other people.
Which I don't think that worked then, did it?
That has never worked in the history of mankind,
Yeah.
actually.
Turns out the rich just get richer.
You don't get rich by spending it,
Yeah.
that's for sure. So the tax reforms definitely are there. A lot of those went in place before the COVID pandemic happened. And I think a lot of the benefits that happened from that tax reform are largely wiped out because of the debt the country has incurred as a result of a lot of these COVID relief packages.
Yeah, but that tax plan, that corporate tax rate is going to stay in place until the new administration could put something together to overturn it. So it's something to think about.
That's correct. Yeah. So the benefits will still be there for a lot of that. Let's talk about the reform of the justice system a little bit. So one of the things that Trump tried to do was address the mass incarceration in the federal prisons. For several decades, they've been severely overpopulated. A lot of it had to do with lower level drug arrests for minor infractions. But he also overhauled the federal sentencing to reduce the minimum mandatory sentences. And that's kind of a concept that a lot of people aren't familiar with, is that the federal guidelines for sentencing for just about every crime out there, there's a minimum amount of time that you can sentence someone. And even if it's an insignificant issue, but you have to sentence someone, they have to get that minimum amount of time. And that was largely done to try to preserve fairness in the penal system itself so that you couldn't have people buying judges off and stuff like that. So one of the things that Trump did do was he reduced those minimum sentences so that even though you may be going into jail for these offenses, you're getting out sooner. He also tried to shift focus from punishment to rehabilitation and more job training opportunities. One of the problems that convicted felons have when they get out of prison is they lack the skills to get jobs and employment. As a result, they become a burden on society. So the focus kind of shifted to try to prepare these individuals to get back into the workforce and become producing members of society again. And what's the last thing that we have to talk about for his accomplishments?
Defeating the ISIS caliphate. Trump has falsely claimed ISIS is totally defeated. Though territory has been lost, there are still an estimated 18,000 fighters between Iraq and Syria. The U.S. was successful in killing ISIS leader, probably going to pronounce his name wrong, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. I apologize if
That's
I
actually
didn't say
pretty
that
good.
wrong.
We'll go with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's no different than when George Bush landed on the aircraft carrier with the big giant banner and said mission accomplished.
Right.
Progress has been made. More progress has been claimed than has been made, I think. At this point in time, ISIS is lacking territory, but they're not lacking support. They're getting support through other countries like Syria and Iraq and Iran. So they're being funded by these countries, but they might not have the territory that they once had.
Yeah, I think conflicts like this in this area of the world are always going to be this messy, and they have been since the U.S. began to get involved way back in the 70s and 80s. It's always been a difficult, not war, but difficult conflict to manage, whether through proxy or through direct involvement from the U.S. And I think that this is no different. I think, and it's going to continue to be this way because it's too difficult of something for us to manage and certainly not fix.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. One of the things that I didn't put in here that was related to this was the drawdown on troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, which Donald Trump has made significant progress there. He had wanted to get us out of that area completely, but because of the sensitive nature of that territory, we couldn't pull out entirely.
Yeah.
But the number of troops that are in that area have been reduced, ironically enough, to the point that we had more people in Washington, more soldiers in Washington for the inauguration than we had in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Wow. Yeah, it's difficult because I'm obviously not like a general or anything, but it seems like we make the progress with the troops, and then the second the troops are gone, all that progress is lost, sometimes overnight. So it's a difficult call. It's easy to say we're going to get everybody out of here, but it's a sticky situation. It's not that easy.
Yeah, and when you think about it, you figure this is the longest war the United States has ever been involved in. You know, the closest one to this was Vietnam, which was roughly 10, 12 years. But figure we've been fighting this war in that territory, this war on terror, since September 11th attacks.
Yeah, and we could probably do a whole show comparing that to Vietnam. I mean, they're somewhat similar in terms of a difficult terrain, the language barriers, things like that, guerrilla tactics, and all that. It is just a mess.
Absolutely. So that's some of the notable accomplishments that Trump had in office. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about some of the failures that I think a lot of people have focused on.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. Today, we are talking about the legacy of Donald Trump. We just went over some of his notable accomplishments. I think it's prudent for us to talk about some of his failures at this point in time. So the first one that I have here is the incident in Charlottesville related to George Floyd. So during this entire process, Trump really blamed, quote, many sides for the violence at the rally for George Floyd. And at the time, he claimed that there were, quote, very fine people on both sides. One side being the Black Lives Matter group who were protesting the death of George Floyd. The other side being made up largely of white supremacists and the KKK. This statement itself really stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest here when he was describing these white supremacists as very fine people. And he took criticism from both Democrats and Republicans, including traditionally staunch supporters like Lindsey Graham. What are your thoughts on this particular failure of Trump's?
I think it seems like such a simple thing, right? You see white supremacists and KKK leaders on one side. You just have to condemn them. And he couldn't do it. And he was directly asked, I remember multiple times by reporters, to just condemn them. And he wouldn't do it. And it makes you wonder why that is, and what is going through his mind and his administration's mind, why he simply would not come out and condemn them. And you saw that again recently with the insurrection at the Capitol, where he said, "Go home, we love you." Very kind words to people that were attempting to storm and succeeded in storming the Capitol building. And it just makes you wonder.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that when this happened, there was a lot of research that came out about Trump's history and the Trump family history, and information came out at this time that his father was a member of the KKK. He was arrested in the early part of the 20th century at a KKK rally for crimes that were committed at the time. So it was very disturbing to see this side of a president come out where he was openly endorsing white supremacists. And that was a pattern of repeated alarmist type behavior that we've saw the last at least 2 years of his presidency where we've had these issues. What was the next thing that we're pointing out here?
So we're taking a look at America's global image under the Trump presidency. America's global image has declined significantly under Trump. I think that anybody that reviews the last 4 years can probably put that together. Trump repeatedly insulted key U.S. allies while cozying up to dictators. Trump pulled the U.S. out of key international agreements, like the Paris Climate Accords. Surveys show the majority of citizens from 32 different countries have an overall lack of confidence in Trump to do the right thing on world affairs. And finally, Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic has left the U.S. embarrassed on the world stage and created a void in global leadership that China is rushing to fill in currently.
Yeah, I mean, he left us really in a bit of a predicament.
Yeah.
So much so that immediately after the election, before the results were certified, you had allied nations that were reaching out to Joe Biden to congratulate him on the win before it was even official.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the long-term implications of that are, because I think a lot of the damage that he did, at least as far as our allies go, are things that can be built back fairly quickly with him out of office.
Mm-hmm.
My concerns center around more the relationships that he had with the adversaries of the United States, like the Putins and North Korea and so forth. I mean, he really took the country in a direction that it never went in the past. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple instances of him talking about how he admires Vladimir Putin and things like that. And it's not a great look, right? I mean, on paper, Americans supposed to be like this bastion of freedom, which obviously in practice is not necessarily the case. But when you're on the world stage cozying up with known dictators, borderline admitted dictators who have, of course, never been proven, but have, eliminated political rivals through, various means or subjugating their own people. When you see the leader of the free world being friendly with them, it sends a disturbing message to other countries, not to mention the people of America as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of scary when we get to that point. So the next thing we talk about is immigration, which was one of the things that Donald Trump had campaigned on. His promise to build the wall, to stop illegal immigration coming in, to deport the people that were in the country already that shouldn't have been here, in his opinion. Trump has been accused of human rights abuses and violating international law by the UN for his treatment of undocumented immigrants. I couldn't tell you the last time an American president was accused of human rights violations. Trump policies had led to the separation of at least 5,500 families and saw children placed in cages for the world to see, which was another embarrassing moment that the press really hammered him on. 445 of those children still are left separated from their parents. So it's a continuing problem where they can't find these parents for the children. The president of the American Academy for Pediatrics labeled Trump's policies nothing less than government-sanctioned child abuse.
Yikes.
What are your thoughts on his immigration policy? I mean, we've got a lot of the wall done, right? So is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't think the wall was a great idea. I mean, it for people that think that we should take a strong stance on immigration, I think it's a very good physical thing to see. But I think in practice, I don't know that the wall really works. And not to mention, speaking back to the ICE situation, we actually talked about doing a whole episode on ICE. But doing the research, we found it would be better to just lump it in with this. But the fact that 545 children don't have their parents or any real person to take care of them still, and for this long is horrifying. And the fact that it's still happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And Trump tried to defend his actions by claiming that a lot of these children were not brought over by their parents. They were being brought over by criminals and mules and, people that were trying to get into the country illegally and using the children as a means to get into the country. And there just wasn't any facts to back that claim up. As with a lot of the things that we deal with Trump, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of what the Trump administration has labeled alternative facts. And I think you have a difficulty in sifting through. There's so much misinformation thrown out about these things that it takes an effort to sift through that you shouldn't have to make such an effort to do.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we'll probably touch on it more later in our concluding thoughts, but I think that's part of the plan, is to put as much false things out there that you question what is real and what is true. And then from there, you can make your reality whatever you want.
Right. So what was the next thing that we're going to ding him on here?
So the handling of Iran, Syria, and Afghanistan, we touched a little bit on this with the troop withdrawals. Trump's decision to withdraw from the U.S. from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal induced chaos throughout the Middle East. It remains one of Trump's most unpopular decisions in the global arena. Trump has failed to thwart Iran's aggressive behavior through his maximum pressure campaign. He exacerbated the situation by ordering the killing of Iran's top general, another name I'm going to probably mispronounce, Qasem Soleimani, which was huge when it happened. I remember we talked about it on one of the previous shows, about how insane that was. And it's almost like we forgot it happened, but here it is again, looking back at everything. Iran has since abandoned the nuclear deal and is actively working towards nuclear weapons. Again, Trump pulled U.S. troops out of Syria, abandoning U.S. allied Kurdish forces. I remember that was extremely controversial too, especially with, I saw a lot of veterans on Twitter like talking about that when that happened, about how that was wrong to do because you left these people hanging to dry. The withdrawal induced a humanitarian crisis in the region and the security vacuum that Russia, Iran, and accused war criminal Syrian President Bashar al-Assad benefited from. Trump started a massive pullout of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, essentially surrendering the country once again to the Taliban. And finally, Trump dismissed published reports that Russia paid bounties to Taliban-like militants to kill U.S. troops. So we're getting a little bit of the cozying up with dictators again in this section as well. And overall, it's not a great look.
Yeah, no. And if you look, at the big picture of weakening our position in the Middle East by all these troop pullouts, by pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, which is just going to incite additional chaos. It's going to rile the Israelis who won't stand for Iraq having nuclear weapons. So they're going to act unilaterally on their own if we do not maintain a coalition in the area. You're basically lighting the fuse on a powder keg. And I look at what he did and I can't fathom why you would have done that. He claims that he doesn't want America tied up in these long-term wars, but we're almost like the control rod in the nuclear reactor there. And if you pull that control rod out, the nuclear reactor is going to melt down. Yeah,
it's kind of like what we talked about before. Like it's easy to say, I don't want America involved in these situations. But when you've got nuclear deals signed with these countries, that's more than just a war. There's larger implications there on both the world stage and for that local area. And it's like you said, it's lighting a fuse that I guess the new administration is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, and it's a headache. I mean, not only is it weakening the U.S. position and our allies' position in the region, you're directly strengthening our adversary's position at the same time, which makes you wonder what team Trump was really playing for at the time. So the next big one that Trump has been trying to take care of since day one was the repeal and the replacement of Obamacare. Trump lost the vote for a full congressional appeal, thanks to, at the time,
Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
No, Senator McCain.
Oh.
That was like one of the great acts of defiance that Senator McCain had against Donald Trump was to turn that vote down. He's managed to dismantle parts of it, including the rollbacks on tax penalties for those that are not enrolled in health care. But in the meantime, he's failed to offer anything close to a replacement. He's been questioned several times on this, and his statement has been, it's ready. We're going to roll it out in a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks never got here. He never rolled out a replacement for it. The Supreme Court, as a result of that, did not allow it to be repealed because there wasn't a replacement for it. But he's weakened it significantly. And this is another problem that he's generated that the current administration, the new administration, is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the Biden team has said what their plans are to deal with this, but you'd imagine they're probably just going to reinforce it and kind of build back up where it was.
You have to. You have to at least put in the stuff that was pulled out at this point, because it's kind of silly to not have these in.
And it's unfortunate for people because this was one of his big things when he was running for president, was that he was going to get rid of Obamacare and put something new into place. It's unfortunate that all these people that voted for him are promised that, and unfortunately simply never got it.
Well, and the ultimate irony is that he didn't want to get rid of Obamacare. He wanted to get rid of Obama's legacy. And Obamacare, being a large part of that legacy, was one of the things that he targeted.
Right.
What's the next thing we have?
So we have the twice impeachment. This has been obviously in the news recently. Trump is the first U.S. president to be impeached twice while in office. Trump's first impeachment was for abuse of power when he attempted to solicit outside foreign interference in a U.S. election. I believe that was Ukraine, correct?
Correct.
Trump withheld $400 million in congressionally approved military aid from the Ukraine to pressure them into investigating Joe Biden's son for corruption. His second impeachment revolved around his attempt to incite an insurrection of his supporters when they stormed and breached the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to stop the certification of the 2020 election.
Yeah, we're not talking about flimsy things here.
No.
We're literally talking about two treasonous acts that the President of the United States, who's sworn to uphold the Constitution, has been accused of. Now, the first impeachment that we had, he was not found guilty. He was not convicted of the impeachment. But that was largely because the Senate was controlled, majority of the Senate was controlled by the Republicans at the time, who, for whatever reason, whether it was fear of repercussions or what, would not go against Donald Trump despite the overwhelming evidence. You know, the large accusation in that first impeachment was that he solicited outside interference in American elections. If that wasn't enough, based on this phone call that came out, during the whole process of this, when it came out, he later, on public television, on news networks, stood in the driveway of the White House and further solicited China to interfere in the election by investigating Joe Biden's son. So you could throw out that first allegation where he was trying to hold money over the Ukraine's head. He's publicly inviting an aggressor nation to interfere with our election. How he didn't get convicted of that is really just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's stuff like that we'll touch on most likely later, but it sets a dangerous precedent for future presidents of what it means to be president and what you can do and what you can get away with. And this is another example of that.
Yeah, and he, is unique in that he's the first to be impeached twice.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure that's something I'd want to put on my resume.
It's something I've been thinking about a lot, especially with going back and looking at this legacy that will certainly come up. But like my generation and generations around my generation we're living through history for better or worse. And these are things that if I ever have kids and they go to school, the teachers are going to say, go home and ask your parents about when the Capitol was stormed and when the president was impeached twice, like things like that. And I don't know if I want to talk about that, like it's interesting to think of these events. You just see it on Twitter, you see it on the news and things like that, but it's documented history that is going to be in a book someday.
Yeah. And we were there for it. And it's scary. It really is. We were also there for the COVID-19 pandemic. We're still there for it. Trump's handling of COVID-19 will likely go down as one of the biggest disasters in U.S. history. By the time he left office, over 400,000 Americans have died. Trump admittedly downplayed the virus in an interview. He later ignored it completely as he struggled with the election. I mean, from the November election until the day he walked out of office, Trump ignored everything to do with the pandemic, and ignored a lot of his responsibilities as president, because I really think he just had a breakdown at that point. More U.S. citizens have died of COVID than all U.S. soldiers killed in combat in every war since 1945.
I saw that when I was looking over the notes. That is insane.
Yeah. More are dead from COVID than from Vietnam. And Trump completely and repeatedly downplayed the virus. He contradicted top public health experts. He flouted recommendations from his science advisors and his own White House coronavirus task force. He refused to accept responsibility for the pandemic, blaming it even up until his farewell speech on the 20th on China, calling it the China virus. He still won't accept responsibility for it.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it's like you just got to commit, right? Like,
right.
Because at that point, if you're going to admit that you had any fault, you admit to one thing, you got to admit to it all. But I think, and this is a discussion that's happened a bunch of times by now, but every president has like one or two really big crises in their administration, right?
Yeah.
And this was definitely one of his, and his handling of it was poor.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you fall on the political spectrum, it's hard to disagree with that his handling was terrible and lives were lost because of it.
Well, and it's almost like had he done absolutely nothing, that would have been better than what he did, because he contradicted medical professionals' advice. He made fun of and mocked people who were taking advice from medical professionals to wear masks and social distance. He deliberately exposed his Secret Service detail when he himself contracted COVID so that he could have a publicity stunt driving around the block for the press. Then he returns to the White House, still infected, and makes a show out of taking his mask off and working in the White House with everybody else and exposing everyone else.
Yeah. It's, and I don't know if we have it here, but also pulling out of the World Health Organization was really bad in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about that on another show as well. We're repeating ourselves, but like just the headline makes itself, right? Trump pulls out of World Health Organization in the middle of a pandemic. Like, why would you do that?
Exactly. Well, and he wasn't taking anyone's advice anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered if we stayed in there. So what's the next thing that we have? Because it sounds like we got a lot more bad than good here, but
yeah, this section is a little long in the tooth, but I feel like we're doing our best here. So the next section is about the U.S. economy. Trump took credit for a robust economy that he inherited when he took office and had shown nearly 10 years of steady growth prior to his election. The U.S. now faces one of the worst economic crises in history, linked to his disastrous response to COVID-19, which we just talked about. Over 22 million jobs were lost. Unemployment is at 7.9%, more than double the 3.4% of the pandemic. The national debt is at the highest level since World War II. And the economic growth of the U.S. will average just above 0% for the first Trump term.
Trump made quite a measure of success by citing the growth of the stock market throughout his presidency. And the funny thing is if you look back over the last 10 years, if you look back over the last two administrations, the Bush and the Obama administration, we had the recession that hit during President Bush's term. Then you had all the bailouts, the controversy over corporations that were too big to fail and the government bailing them out and so forth. But then we went on a steady increase in the economy that grew at a pretty consistent pace year over year, despite what Trump did. You didn't see any spikes in growth under Trump that would mark something significant that he did. But what you did see was all the controversies that came out with Trump. The economy continued to grow. And it grew not because of Trump, but in spite of Trump. Because typically any other president who would have gotten tied up in some of the controversies that he did would have had a direct impact on the economy. And it was almost as though the economy and the world expected this sort of thing from Trump. So they sort of shook it off and it didn't affect the economy. But even then, what you had was the pandemic hit. Your unemployment soared. The country shut down for a period of time. and the country never fully recovered from that. Our unemployment today is more than twice what it was before the pandemic hit. So if there's a measure of success to look at here, it's what the recovery looked like after the crash. And after the last recession that we had, there was significant growth. We've yet to see that in this case here. So the economy, even though the Dow Jones and the stock market's up and that's all great, the economy itself, the jobs themselves that were promised, that Trump has touted over and over again, just haven't materialized.
Yeah, and again, we go back to the, we go back again to the incoming administration and how they're going to, you still have all the negative impacts of the pandemic, which is still going on, and how they're going to deal with that and how they can come back from that. It's a complex thing that is not as easy as, oh, I was president for 4 years. Everything that happened in those 4 years is cut off from what was before me and what is after me. This is what I did. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
And especially when it comes to the economy, which is obviously one of those hot button issues that people love to talk about when they talk about who they're going to vote for or who is a successful president. But it's not as black and white as, some people would like to think it is.
Absolutely. So the last thing that we wanted to kick Donald Trump for here is damaging democracy. So Trump consistently eroded democratic norms during his tenure. Trump's constant attack on the media led UN experts to warn of raised risk of violence against journalists. He's threatened to deploy U.S. troops to American cities and demanded poll workers stop counting ballots to sway the election in his favor. Trump's constant dissemination of disinformation on the electoral process have led historians to draw parallels between him and Benito Mussolini. Trump has refused to accept the clear-cut results of the election and failed to provide any substantial proof to his claims for election fraud. The president is charged now with inciting insurrection at a rally and attempting to prevent a peaceful transfer of power. So now, since I wrote these notes up earlier in the week, additional information has come out that shows not only did Donald Trump incite and encourage his supporters to storm the Capitol, he also has financial ties to several organizations that were part of that shows he's financed those groups to do exactly that. I don't think democracy has ever been threatened like this since the Civil War. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And the difficult part is these are all facts, right, that we've just stated, but I can still guarantee you that there's somewhat half of the country that would disagree with this. And that's where the real damage is, the erosion of a common reality that we all have, right? Because, and I think that is, and I mentioned it before, but I think that that's part of the tactic, is to put so much information, false information out there, and to do all these things that for any other president, any one of them would have got them out of office, most likely, or a terrible scandal. But to just keep doubling down and to keep, moving facts around, it has eroded just average people's way of thinking. And I've seen it in my own life personally, people I know, that we can't even talk about it because we don't agree on the facts and what is real and what is not. And just because I have facts, it makes me, I'm only saying that because I hate Trump. But it's not that's not what is true. And I think that is the thing that we're going to see in the coming years, is this difficulty of telling what is fact and fiction. Even if Trump is no longer in office, I think that stain is going to remain with the country for a while.
Yeah, you could have your own opinion. You're entitled to your own opinion, right, but you're not entitled to your own facts. The facts are the facts. And regardless of how much effort is put forth to disseminate misinformation, to skew those facts, the facts are still there. It's unfortunate that we have to go through the effort, almost like an archaeological dig, to get through all of the lies so we can get down to the facts themselves. And even then, the diehard supporters of someone like Trump still just simply refuse to accept the facts. Whether or not you choose to accept the truth doesn't make it any less true. And there are people out there that are having a very difficult time accepting that. One of the networks we stream on here, we stream on a network called Vaughn Live, and there's a lot of Trump supporters that watch that particular service. And there's been a couple of instances where people, during our replays there, have directly questioned, what are we talking about? Trump won the election in a landslide. And it makes me stop to wonder, despite all of the information that's out there, none of which points to a Trump victory, how could somebody possibly think that he won when not a shred of evidence has been produced, despite there being dozens of court cases that have been shot down by the Supreme Court, mind you, which has a majority of conservative justices that he put on the court, have shot down so many of these lawsuits that he's brought. How could people still think that he won just because that's what they want?
Yeah. And I think, and it's something that I've noticed a lot too, there's a lack of accountability in that mindset where, especially when we had the insurrection at the Capitol, immediately the conspiracies from that side of politics were trying to blaming on Antifa and things like that, where in reality, that's not the case. I don't think there was any evidence for that. It's a lack of accountability where it can't be me. It can't be my fault. And I think that's what you see a lot. And especially now, Trump has made himself out to be a martyr, especially with the election results. And I think that just feeds more into the cycle of a lack of accountability and, Trump can do no wrong. And, it was robbed, it was stolen from him, which none of that is true.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, let's take another quick break. We'll come back and we'll have a kind of an open discussion about the lasting effects of Trump and what the future under Joe Biden is going to look like. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com. Welcome back. We are talking about the legacy of Donald Trump. And then we're going to talk about what the lasting effects of Donald Trump are on the world in general. And I'm going to throw a couple of these categories at you, and I want to get your thoughts. So the first thing that I have here I'd like to hear about is, what is the future of the Judiciary and the Supreme Court thanks to Donald Trump?
Well, like we've talked about, he had the 3 Supreme Court judges and what was it, 150? 250 other judges appointed. So that's definitely a lasting impact. I think it's really going to come down to, which is what I said during that segment, was how these judges are going to come down on a lot of decisions. I mean, we saw they don't always just toe the party line like you'd expect with certain things that Trump was trying to get them to do. We just talked about it. I forget what it was, where they
well, for the election.
Yeah. So something like that, if the fear is that they would just follow his orders, that was proven to be false. So I think that shows a somewhat of a hopeful thing where they are impartial, which is what you want from your judges. So hopefully we'll see that continued impartiality.
The one thing that does concern me, though, is you have a man who appointed several hundred judges to lifetime appointments that will affect the judiciary moving forward. And this is the same man who was such a terrible judge of character appointing cabinet members that he had a revolving door on his cabinet and couldn't keep cabinet members. And he had positions where he had 3 and 4 replacements over the course of 4 years. which makes me wonder, how competent and qualified is he to choose a justice that's there for life? Is that something that concerns you at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, and hopefully, he has not been great at picking people, but based off their character. But hopefully, out of those 250, we'll get a third that are good at their jobs, best, for the hope. But if not, then hopefully the system will do its job, and they'll resign, or we'll find replacements. Hopefully,
that's being very optimistic. Okay.
Well, we're always so doom and gloom, I try to think positively.
How about foreign affairs and our allies? What do you think the lasting effects are going to be on that?
Well, I think initially it's probably going to be negative, but luckily we have the benefit of Joe Biden already having a working relationship with a lot of these people, most likely because of his time as vice president. So I think that is going to help rebuild a lot of the ties that Trump might have severed or damaged or tried to sever. And I think, having Joe Biden as the president might, the rest of the world will see America sort of back on track, hopefully, as having a functional government, a more, not traditional, but a more professional government. And I think that'll hopefully be a good thing for, our allies.
And I agree with you 100% on those points. About the economy and taxes, what do you think we can see long-term for that?
Well, we talked about that corporate tax slash. Hopefully that is at least adjusted. I think that's way too much of a slash for corporations. I know you had mentioned that your company, things like that get benefits, but I think big picture, I do think it negatively impacts the most amount of people. For the economy, I think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better until we get coronavirus under control, which hopefully with the new administration we will, now that they're encouraging science and vaccinations are rolling out and things like that. Hopefully, once the virus is stabilized, the economy will also, in turn, be.
I think you're on the mark there. It's really everything still centers around Corona.
Yeah.
What about immigration? Can we expect long-term effects of his immigration policies?
I think that also kind of ties in with foreign allies and the world's perception of America. Hopefully, Biden will be able to be a little bit more welcoming and to immigration. Now, I know some people are very against any kind of immigration, but I think that taking the stance that Donald Trump did of almost xenophobia, or not almost, xenophobia, is not the way to go about it. And I think even if Biden's going to come down strictly on it, I'm not sure he's going to be as vocal about it.
Sure, yeah. And what about, I specifically mentioned COVID here, but pandemics in general. Do you think the next pandemic, hopefully that won't be for at least another 100 years, do you think the country is going to respond differently than it did during Donald Trump's reign?
I'd say most likely, especially because, looking 100 years back with the Spanish flu, people have such a, it's when you look in a history book and you see all the pictures in black and white, it's not as tangible. But with this, in our modern age, where you have, social media and things that will most likely be able to be looked back on, I think it'll be a lot more real for people. And hopefully, if it's less than 100 years, people like my age or younger will be alive still and will say that, this is not a joke. And hopefully, whatever administration is in power at that time will have learned from past mistakes and, be able to have some sort of pandemic task force, is designed for these things, especially as the world gets more and more globalized every day.
Yeah, here's the hope. And finally, what do you think the long-term impact on the presidency itself is going to be? I mean, we just had a president who challenged every norm and every check that's been put in place on the power of the presidency. Do you think there's going to be a lasting effect on the presidency?
Absolutely. And I think that Trump testing all of those limits is going to set like I said before, a dangerous precedent going forward. And I think that even the Biden administration will probably take some liberties with that as well, with what a president can do with things like executive orders or pardons and things like that. Hopefully that extended power will get reeled back, checks and balances and all over time. But I think in the immediate future, it's still going to be a little up in the air on how the presidency is viewed.
Okay. So the future, all right, let's turn our attention to the future under Joe Biden. He's got 4 years. I don't think he's going to do a second term. So he's got 4 years to accomplish what he wants. And the first thing really is to unify a nation that is more divided now than any other time in our history, save for the Civil War. Do you think Joe Biden has what it takes to unify the country, given the staunch support of 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump?
Honestly, I don't know. Because it's just, in his speech during the inauguration, he talked about it not being about parties, which I feel like every president says, but that doesn't work. It's not how that works. And in my experience, I don't think that that's possible. I just think that, and I don't know what it is, but I think people are much too focused on their political parties, and that divides us so much. And I'm not really sure how you can fix that. I think the best way to go about fixing it would be in the government, seeing, handshakes from both parties, agreeing on things. But if that's not going to change, then I don't see how that's going to change for the public either.
I agree. Handling of COVID. So there's been a number of things in the first couple of days of the Biden administration that he signed by executive order to address COVID. Do you feel more confident in Biden's ability to handle COVID than Trump's? Do you think we're going to get ahead of this? Where do you think we're going with this, and are we going in the right direction now?
Overall, I am more confident in Joe Biden. My only fear is that so much damage has already been done by the Trump administration, and how Biden is going to be able to, if he wants to be effective, if he'd be able to be as effective as he can, given the things that Trump has done. Hopefully, using those executive orders, like you said, he'll be able to reverse a lot of that and speed the process up and get vaccinations out and get the resources to people that need it. Again, a lot of hoping. We'll see what actually happens.
So, foreign policy. So you had mentioned already that Joe Biden has an established working relationship with a lot of our allies. Over the 4 years that he was in office, Trump did a lot of damage to those through insults, through pulling out of treaties and military movements and various things. Do you think Joe Biden has it within him to rebuild those alliances in the short time that he's probably going to be in office?
I think, yes, I do. And I think part of that comes from, and it's one of the criticisms people might have of Joe Biden of being a career politician. But I think that when it comes to foreign policy and foreign affairs, being a career politician can be a good thing, because, you saw Trump, who's not as experienced of a political leader, how that worked out dealing with other world leaders. So I think having someone that was already vice president and has met all these people, but has also been in the quote unquote business for his entire life, I think that you pick up some skills along the way that make you a better diplomat, and hopefully that those skills are put to use.
Very good point. So some of those executive orders that Joe Biden has signed into law at this point dealt with undoing some of the things that Donald Trump did. Do you think that Biden should be focused on erasing the Trump legacy, or do you think his efforts would be better focused elsewhere?
Well, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, because erasing the Trump legacy will also benefit a lot of the American people, especially when it comes to things like the COVID-19 pandemic, because part of Trump's legacy was hindering the process of getting people vaccinated and the resources, like I said, that they need. So I think in those instances where erasing Trump's legacy would benefit the American people, I think that is a good thing. But just turning it into a contest of, if I can erase this guy's name from the books of history, I don't think that's worth your time.
So the last one that I wanted to talk about here is the chance of success. You mentioned that Joe Biden is a career politician. He's been in the White House, administration before as vice president. He's spent, an eternity in the Senate and the legislative branch. So he comes to us with a wealth of experience. But he's also the oldest president to take office at this point in time at 78 years old. Do you think his age is going to contribute to his ability to be successful? And do you think he'll have the support that he needs? Because right now, there's a small majority, but there is a majority of Democrats in the Senate, and there's a majority of Democrats in the House. So the Democrats really hold the power right now, at least for the next 2 years. Will that help his success? Do you think he can be successful in his platform and what he wants to do for the next 4 years?
I've said it before, but I certainly hope so. I do think his age is definitely going to be one of the main points of contention for people that criticize him. I hope that in terms of his mental facilities, he seems like he's all there in his speeches and things like that. He speaks very eloquently, except for a few stutters occasionally, which, people will harp on. But I think in terms of leading, I think he'll do what he needs to do. And I think the people behind him will also be extremely helpful. And the presidency is obviously a huge burden for someone to undertake. We've seen the before and after photos of, when people come into office versus when they leave. I think despite his age, I think he'll be able to, fulfill his duties to the best of his ability.
And I would tend to agree with you, largely because I think he's smart enough to turn his cabinet into an asset rather than a distraction. Mm-hmm. Much of the Trump presidency centered around controversy of cabinet members, cabinet turnover. He didn't trust his cabinet members. He didn't trust the people around him. He was more inclined to make unilateral decisions on his own rather than to trust the experts around him. And I think Joe Biden is smart enough, experienced enough, and wise enough to not fall into those same pitfalls. So I think the team that Joe Biden puts around him is really going to be what contributes to his success more than anything. So we'll take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll get any final thoughts that you have and finish up with the podcast business. Go for your final thoughts.
So I think looking back at the Trump legacy, one of the biggest appeals he had when he went into office was people didn't want another career politician. They wanted something different. And they got that. And it overall, I don't think was a good thing. We've broken it down into various different topics, but I think overall it had a negative impact on the country, right? And you ask yourself, I forget what president did this, but are you better off 4 years? Hang on, I'm messing this up. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And I think most people would say no, whether it's for economic reasons or the impact the coronavirus had on them. And obviously you can't blame all these things just on Trump. However, he was the president and he's supposed to be the leader. And I think it's hard to disagree that he failed as a leader. And hopefully, there's obviously detriments to having a career politician in power, but I think now that is what the country most likely needs.
Yeah, I think this was a case of we got what we asked for, and what we asked for was not what we needed. It was a learning experience, I think. The country will continue to feel the effects of for years to come, but I think it's a learning experience that we won't make that same mistake again. That was all we had for today. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming to talk about this volatile subject. Before we go, I do want to throw the plugs out there. You can get the audio version of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. Video versions of all of our podcasts can be found if you look for Insights into Things. We are listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Pandora, and something else that I can't remember. I really need to write all these down.
Tune in?
Tune in, sure.
Sorry, tune in. Sorry about that.
We would also invite you to reach out to us and give us your feedback. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We are on Twitter at insights_things. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. On Instagram, you can find us at insightsintothings, where you can get links to all that and everything else on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. Anything else?
That is it.
All right. Another one in the books. Bye. over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 12, The Cryptocurrency Conundrum. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen, today.
Hello, everybody.
How you doing today, Sam?
I'm doing okay.
So today we're going to be talking about crypto. Do you own any crypto?
I did for a little bit. I had Dogecoin when that was like a joke.
Yeah, it still is, by the way.
Yeah, but it's kind of settled out because I was using, we'll talk about it, but I was using Robinhood to get it. Yeah. And I think my friends and I all started doing it as a joke. But yeah, I had a little bit of Doge for a while. Not anymore, though.
Okay. Doge actually is not that difficult to generate. It's not like your Bitcoin and stuff like that where it's finite and crypto complicated.
Yeah, I don't know how any of it works, though. That's the point of this show. You'll explain it to all of us in great detail.
Yes, I will, hopefully, in terms that we can all understand. But before we do that, I would suggest folks subscribe to the podcast itself so you get it first thing Monday morning at 8 o'clock when they come out. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast by looking us up as Insights into Tomorrow. The video versions of the podcast and all of our network podcasts are listed as Insights into Things. You can get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, pretty much any place you can get a podcast these days. I would also invite folks to give us your feedback. Email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. Let us know how we're doing on Twitter at insights_things. You can give us feedback on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. Shoot us a note on Instagram at Insights into Things, or you can reach out to us on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a look at what cryptocurrency is. We'll understand a little bit about what blockchain technology is. Then we're going to take a look at some of the real-time or real-world impacts that cryptocurrency is having on today's economy and whether it's worth investing in. And then finally, we'll wrap up by looking at how cryptocurrency is changing the world and what the future of crypto looks like. And we'll talk a little bit about a new phenomenon in crypto called NFTs. So hopefully by the time we get done here, we'll all have a good understanding of what crypto is.
And we'll be dumping money into the market to buy some.
Shall we get started?
Yes.
All right. So, what is crypto? So, this definition of crypto comes from NerdWallet. Figure that was kind of a safe place to go to. So, cryptocurrency or crypto is a digital currency that can be used to buy goods and services, but uses an online ledger with strong cryptography to secure online transactions. So when you, unlike a nationalized currency, there's no borders to crypto at this point. It exists entirely online, and it's basically tied up inside of a cryptographic algorithm. Much of the interest in these unregulated currencies is to trade for profit, with speculators at times driving prices skyward, as we've seen recently with Bitcoin. Many companies have issued their own currencies, often called tokens, and these can be traded specifically for goods or services that company provides. Everyone's familiar with microtransactions, and nowadays you can buy currency with a company that you then use to buy things inside that company. It's no different than when you used to go to the arcade, and the arcade machines didn't take quarters, they took tokens. So you put a dollar bill in a machine and got 4 tokens out instead of 4 coins. And that kind of kept that money tied up inside of that establishment. So cryptocurrencies also use technology called blockchain. So we'll talk about blockchain in a second. That's really the driving technology behind blockchain. But part of the appeal of cryptocurrency is the security of it. A lot of people feel the anonymity that cryptocurrency offers is a selling point, because you can go out and make a transaction, a purchase online somewhere, and not have that traced back to you through a PayPal account or a credit card or something else. But what people don't realize is it's not as untraceable as they think it is, because there is a digital footprint. There's a digital trail that goes along with it that can be traced back to your wallet, because you have to have a digital wallet that you apply these coins to. So, with that in mind, questions, statements, inquiries?
No, I think that all makes sense. I mean, my familiarity with Bitcoin is mostly from the last season of Mr. Robot, actually, which ended a while ago. But in that show, the economy basically tanks. And this one company, E-Corp, comes up with E-Coin, which is basically takes the place of physical money. So everybody has their E-Coin wallet on their phone. So I kind of got the concept a little bit from that. I mean, it's a fictionalized portrayal, but they did their research in terms of, using Bitcoin as a replacement for physical money.
Sure. And really, I mean, money is, currency itself is anything that has a value associated with it that you can trade for things. Whether it's paper money that we have, whether it's gold coins because the material that it's made from has a value associated with it, or nowadays with U.S. currency where there isn't a backing to it. There's no silver or gold backing to it. There's an intrinsic value based on the current economic state. So as a result, the dollar goes up and down depending on what our trade state is and other factors in the world. Cryptocurrency is the same sort of scenario, but it's affected by things very differently. Like one of the things that we're seeing nowadays is Bitcoin is soaring right now. And one of the reasons it took a recent jump was Tesla, Elon Musk's company, decided that they're going to take Bitcoin payment for cars, and they invested more than $1 billion to acquire Bitcoin. Well, anytime a commodity is purchased in volumes like that, the cost of it goes up just because of the perceived value of it at that point. So you have speculative investment like that that's causing a rise in value.
Yeah, that happened with, we talked about Dogecoin earlier too. Elon Musk would make a tweet about Dogecoin and it would shoot up 20 cents or something like that.
Sure.
So and you get that with regular stocks too, but with crypto, it's even more volatile like that.
Well, and Elon Musk is a great person to pick on because he's the type of person who stock in Tesla goes up significantly, and then he tweets and says, "Oh, well, that's overvalued," and then the stock plummets. Mm-hmm. And when you're the second richest man in the world, you can stand to lose $40 billion and it doesn't really put a dent in your bank account, but your other investors can't afford that kind of recklessness and that volatility in a stock that they're investing in. And we'll talk later about the investment angle of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but we're going to find that's the same type of thing with crypto. So the technology that it is based on is blockchain. Now, this information comes from another website, Investopedia.com. Blockchain is a decentralized technology spread across many computers that manages and records transactions. Blockchain is a specific type of database. It differs from a typical database in the way it stores information. Blockchains store data in blocks that are then chained together.
Blockchain. I get
blockchain. Once a block is filled with data, it's chained onto the previous block, which makes the data chained together in a chronological order. So one of the problems that you have with this is that as you continue to mine coin in a blockchain, the blockchain gets larger and larger and larger, which requires more storage capacity, it requires more bandwidth to handle, it requires more computing power as it gets progressively larger. Different types of information can be stored on a blockchain, but the most common use so far has been as a ledger for these transactions. In Bitcoin's case, blockchain is used in a decentralized way so that no single person or group has control. Rather, all users collectively retain control. So when you're going to mine Bitcoin, you download whatever the current version of that blockchain is, the entire thing. And as you're churning through it and you fill up the block itself, you're sending that data back out to this collection of computers.
So when we're talking about downloading it, is this like terabytes, petabytes? I don't know, how big does it get?
I don't know what the last count was, but you're talking a massive amount of data right now. Like it would take, I think I was looking at numbers earlier, and it took 8 hours or so over a gigabit line to download the current one. Once you have it, though, you get incremental updates to it. But that's just a sign of how large this is. And the larger it is, the more computations have to be done. So the problem a lot of people are running into is that in order to mine Bitcoin now, people are using very sophisticated hardware. In fact, NVIDIA just came out with their latest line of video cards, and they cryptographically crippled them through a driver update so they couldn't be used for blockchain, because what's happening is you're actually burning more energy in computational power and cooling to run these machines than you're generating in actual funds. So it's environmentally it's not a good thing. I mean, we're not drilling another hole in the ozone or anything, but this is not going down the right path. So in Bitcoin's case, the blockchain's used as a way to store the ledger on here, and the decentralized blockchains are themselves immutable, which means that once the data is entered, it can't be changed. And for Bitcoin, this means that transactions are permanently recorded and viewable to anyone. And that's where that lack of anonymity comes from. Because in order for this whole system to work, you have to use a shared database for these transactions. Now, your existence in here is probably some, 64 character long random GUID number, not, Sam. So there's that level of anonymity. But it also records origins of these. So it can tell geographically by your IP address where it's coming from. So when you process something on the blockchain, it knows what your ID is. It might not know who you are, but it can see where you're at. So a lot of cyber forensic analysis is going into some of these, because a lot of people in the criminal underworld are using Bitcoin to fund their terrorist organizations and criminal organizations because of that level of security. So as a result, federal authorities and government authorities around the world are developing new tools to try to de-anonymize some of these transactions to track it down so that they can generate evidence against criminals. So that's really what blockchain is. It's the technology behind, it's the database behind cryptocurrency. Questions, comments?
No, I mean, it seems relatively straightforward so far. Yeah, so my only thing is, like, how does this translate into actual value? Because, like, I understand how you get it and how it's made, but, like, is it just because there's so much of it that it gives it value?
It's not that there's so much, it's that there's so little. So, for instance, if you look at Bitcoin, the way that you compute or the way that you mine Bitcoin computationally, there's a finite number of Bitcoins that are out there. And the more that are found, the fewer that can be found. So it's almost like, think of it like a baseball card. 10 Ricky Henderson rookies are made. That's all that will ever be made. And they're all in packages that are sitting in stores. So when the first one gets purchased, it's worth, say, $1,000. But when the second one gets purchased, you know that there's only 8 more out there. So the value of the ones that are found go up until all 10 are found. And then there's a fixed value because they exist. They're the only ones that are going to exist.
So that's why you have Tesla getting a bunch of it.
Exactly.
And then it skyrockets.
The problem that you run into is as people trade it and buy and sell and companies start to adopt it as an actual currency, it gets more precious because you have a finite pool of resources now that are now being traded in large blocks.
So people fight over it, and then
exactly. Then you have governments. Like, for instance, Russia has outlawed Bitcoin. So you can't use Bitcoin in Russia to do anything. Where in the United States, I could spend Bitcoin to buy a pizza. It's literally that simple. And in the early days of Bitcoin, it was used very frivolously. It was generated a lot on colleges because a lot of college students would use computers on campus because of the computational power to generate these. So you'd have students that would have 10 Bitcoins that would generate overnight. Then they'd want to order pizza. Well, they didn't have any cash, so the local pizzeria would accept Bitcoin. So you'd spend 2 Bitcoin to buy a pizza.
And 1 Bitcoin now is worth like $10,000 or something like that.
Right. So you have people that spent over $20,000 on pizzas when they were in college. So that's why the volatility of it kind of makes for opportunities, but it also makes for misuse of the currency as well. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll talk about what the impact of cryptocurrency is on today's society.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Today on Insights into Tomorrow, I find the button on the board to actually hit the right scene. Today we're talking about cryptocurrency, and we're going to talk a little bit about the impact of cryptocurrency on today's economy. So we've talked about Bitcoin, we've talked about Dogecoin a little bit. There's actually more than 6,700 different cryptocurrencies that are traded publicly today. And this is according to coinmarketcap.com. Cryptocurrencies continue to proliferate, raising money through initial coin offerings. You've heard of IPOs, initial public offerings for stocks. ICOs are what crypto coins actually use to generate their funds. The total value of all cryptocurrencies as of February 18th, 2021 was more than $1.6 trillion according to CoinMarketCap. And the total value of all Bitcoins, the most popular digital currency, was pegged at about $969 billion. Now, you can't have that much market cap and not have a huge influence over the economy. I mean, I can't, it's hard for me to imagine another segment of the economy other than like Apple, that's $1 trillion company, that has that kind of influence over it. So just that value alone gives you a footprint and a place at the table that countries, I mean, that's more value than most countries in the world actually have as far as value goes. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's an astounding amount of wealth. And
Yeah.
like going back to the pizza analogy from earlier, like to think that it's come from that, using it to get a pizza to $969 billion in what, 20 years?
Yeah, not even that.
Yeah, less than that. It's just interesting, and stocks in general, or the market, how that works, it all kind of mystifies me. It seems like it's gambling with extra steps, and like how things get value, and in this case, how things can skyrocket in value over time. It fascinates me, but it's not something I have any idea how to get involved in.
Well, and that's one of the things, that's one of the real distinguishing factors between a cryptocurrency and a stock. A stock is a piece of something. It's a piece of a company. And its value is based on the value of that company, its revenue, its profit, and how that company is being run. And all that information, when you're a publicly traded company, is publicly available. So if you want to go do the research on Intel and see how much Intel is worth, you can see what their assets are, what their liabilities are, what their profits are, what contracts they've landed over the last 12 months. You can do all that research and find all that information. And largely that's what, analysts and stockbrokers do for you. They do all that work for you and come back and say, okay, buy Intel because they're worth it. But you have the freedom to go get that information yourself and do it. You lack that information for the most part when it comes to crypto. I mean, crypto isn't representative of anything substantial. It's literally data that's being passed around. And a lot of people have a very difficult time wrapping their heads around that. It's hard to understand why you would need something like that. Granted, you can have a currency that doesn't have borders. So, for instance, you have the euro versus the dollar. And the euro traditionally trends a few cents higher in value than the dollar does, depending on what's going on from a geopolitical standpoint. But that currency itself is based on gross domestic product. It's based on manufacturing output. There's a measurable metric that you can look at for it. So you can kind of predict, okay, well, we know that everyone's being hit by the pandemic right now. And sections of Europe are being hit worse than others. So the chances are their economy is going to be impacted by that further. So maybe now is not a good time. And I'm saying this strictly from a theoretical standpoint. I am not an investment broker, or am I qualified to comment on any of this stuff? But you can see these signs, these trends, and determine that might not be the investment that you want because the euro may go down as their economy is impacted. You can't do that with Bitcoin. Tomorrow, Bitcoin could lose 30% for no apparent reason. Or it could gain 30% for equally no reason.
It's volatile.
That is
it's the
incredibly.
buzzword, yeah.
incredibly volatile. So why do people like cryptocurrency? Why don't you tell us, why people, what the appeal of cryptocurrency is?
Yeah, so supporters see cryptocurrency, things like Bitcoin, as a currency of the future, and they're racing to buy them now before they become more valuable, which we've already seen that with going from buying pizzas to being worth, $900 some billion. Some supporters like the fact that crypto removes central banks from managing the money supply, since over time these banks tend to reduce the value of money through inflation, so Bitcoin can't be inflated the way normal money can. Other supporters like the technology behind crypto, like the blockchain, which we talked about earlier, because it's decentralized processing and recording system and can be more secure than usual payment options. And then finally, some speculators like crypto because they're going up in value and have no interest in the currency's long-term acceptance as a way to move money.
And that's a very good point, is that if you look at it from a long-term standpoint, it's so volatile and traded so frequently that people aren't looking at it as a long-term. Like people buy Disney stock and they hold on the Disney stock for 30 years and they continue to increase in value. They may get dividends from it, but ultimately it's a long-term thing that someday you'll sell that and it's an investment. Whereas cryptocurrency is almost like day trading.
Yeah.
I'm buying it this morning because I know this afternoon chances are it's going to be 30% higher and I'm going to make a fortune off of it.
That's essentially what I was doing. Me and my friends, when I talked about Dogecoin earlier, that's what we would do. We bought it, and then for like a week straight, we would check every day to see what the value was. And you could set, in the app we were using, you could set, I think it was called a limit order. So like if Dogecoin went up to 80 cents, you can have it sell then.
Right.
So like if we thought Elon Musk was going to tweet about it and it would make it go up in value, which happened, a lot of people made a lot of money when Dogecoin, when that phenomenon was happening.
Sure.
It's kind of stabled out now, but it was like day trading. And Robinhood, I know, got a lot of flack for that because so much money was being dumped in that they couldn't keep up with it. And I think that finding came out a couple of days ago, where the way Robinhood works is when you go into, and for those that don't know, Robinhood is an app where you can, trade stocks and trade crypto. When you go to buy something through them, they actually wait and basically give you an IOU so that if they can get a better value for it, they can then take that and then you also get the stock. They take off the top.
Right.
But when the things with Dogecoin was happening, so many people were buying in, and with GameStop as well, the GameStop stock situation, they didn't have enough money to keep up. So it's like, when the trend hits the whole world and everybody's doing it like day trading, it can cripple something like Robinhood that's just, the app to the middleman almost.
Yeah, their business model was not capable of keeping up with that. But one of the other things about crypto that we talk about here is that it doesn't use a centralized bank, which means it can't be influenced by governments or government regulation. So you look at how some of the economy works in the United States, and you've got the Federal Trade Commission that makes sure that there's no insider trading and that things are done on the up and up. You have the Federal Reserve that sets interest rates. So with a traditional economy, you have a lot of outside influence. It's not just the market value. A lot of it is the government trying to control the money. Part of that's inflation. When the economy is bad, the government puts more currency into circulation, which devalues the currency but increases spending. And with a cryptocurrency, they don't have that control, which is one of the reasons why Russia had banned Bitcoin, because Bitcoin could really come in and take over an economy because the government has no control over it. So a lot of governments don't understand crypto yet, and those that do and have kind of a good understanding of it are kind of afraid of it, and with good reason. Yeah. One of the other things that we talk about here is the encryption associated with it. Well, that encryption allows you to hide transactions. So right now we've got a big push in the United States where the federal government wants to have access to encrypted data on your phone, in your email, through your social media, because they claim that without that, then they can't do their job from a law enforcement perspective. So the federal government wants access to your encrypted information on your phone. So if they get a warrant for a search warrant, they can execute it, where they can't do that now. Well, they'll never be able to do that with cryptocurrency. They can't go to a manufacturer like Apple or Google and say, put a backdoor in, or we're going to put you out of business. There's no central authority for Bitcoin. So they can't exercise that control. And as a result, it's very appealing to a lot of people who want to do international transactions. You know, when we do transactions with a company overseas, there's a conversion rate that happens. And that conversion makes money for someone. Some money broker somewhere skims off the top, like you talked about with Robinhood. With Bitcoin, it's traded at face value. Nobody skims off the top. Nobody makes a profit off of it. And generally, when no one's making a profit off of a transaction, people have a problem with that.
Yeah.
So you can't have that man in the middle who's doing things. But again, cryptocurrencies are speculative. There's nothing tangible about a cryptocurrency that says, okay, well, I see that Tesla put out 20% more cars this year than they had forecast, so their value is going to go up. There's nothing like that with crypto. It's literally just made up as it goes along. And that's something that scares off investors. So what you get is a completely different class of investors that go after cryptocurrencies. As an investor myself, I'm very risk averse. You know, I will invest money in a guaranteed 8% return any day over the possibility of a 15% return with a 50% chance of loss. That's just the way I am. I'll always go for the sure thing.
I mean, like, I've been investing a little bit. Like, I don't, as I've made clear by this show, I don't really understand how a lot of this stuff works. So I've been using Robinhood, and they got in trouble for kind of gamifying it. But I like that personally because it makes it a lot easier to understand. And the way I've been trading it is like gambling, where if you're putting money in, like, you have to be okay to lose it if you mess something up, or like you're okay having it sit there for a long time. Cause you know, a lot of stocks are, like you talked about with the Disney example, a long-term thing. So I haven't been doing it enough to understand how I do it. But at least with the crypto stuff, I was doing it daily, trying to get like just the smallest amount of value out of it. Where it's not a set 8%, you know, a guaranteed 8% return like you were talking about. So it is weird seeing the comparison of, you know, play it safe long term, but with crypto, it's play it now and hope for the best.
Absolutely. So I guess the real overriding question is, are cryptocurrencies a good investment? So like we said, cryptocurrencies may go up in value, but many investors see them as more speculations and not real investments. And the reason for that is that just like real currencies, cryptocurrencies generate no cash flow. So for you to profit, someone has to pay more for the currency than you did, which is called the greater fool principle. Yeah, I love that one.
That's a funny name.
And it's a legitimate theory for investing. But if you contrast that to a well-managed business, which increases its value over time by growing the profitability and cash flow of an operation, experts note that cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin may not be that safe. And some notable voices in the investment community have advised would-be investors to steer clear of them. Because it's gambling.
Yeah, it's just gambling.
You hit the nail on the head. You're probably better off going to Vegas and betting, you know, $5,000 on black at the roulette than you aren't putting it in to cryptocurrency. Of a particular note, Warren Buffett compared Bitcoin to paper checks, saying, quote, it's a very effective way of transmitting money, and you can do it anonymously and all that. A check is a way of transmitting money too. Are checks worth a lot of money just because they can transmit money? And I think that really boils it down, because in order to do anything with Bitcoin, you either have to generate them through very complex, very costly computational efforts, or you need to buy them. So if you invest the money to buy them, you've paid somebody money for money. Really.
Yeah.
And you're paying that conversion rate.
Mm-hmm.
If you generate it, then you're paying the money to actually, it's not free. Like a lot of people think that, and that's part of the problem is that people think that, oh, well, cryptocurrency, I can generate that, I can quote unquote mine that on my computer. Well, I already own the computer, so it's costing me nothing. If I can mine 3 Bitcoin, that's a fortune. Well, you're not mining for nothing. You're paying the electric bill. You're paying to cool it because it generates so much heat to do these computations. People have actually turned mining computers into heaters for their homes.
Oh, wow.
What they've done is they build a computer with 5 or 6 graphic processor units, high-grade graphics processor units, and they channel that heat into their house, and that's how they heat their house.
That's insane.
I saw one person who lived out in Colorado or something like that, and he actually funneled the heat from his cryptocurrency computer to a chicken coop, and that heats the chicken coop outside.
Well, there you go.
But that's no different than, because you're still paying to use that power. One of the latest trends now is they're putting a lot of crypto mining farms in Alaska so they don't have to pay for the cooling costs. So they're just pulling,
put them in the ice.
Yeah, they're pulling outdoor air in, and that's cooling these machines off.
Yeah, I know there was this was a while ago, probably like a year ago, but the Nintendo Switch had a thing, the gaming console, where people couldn't figure out why when they played this one game, it was like some cooking game, why their Switches kept overheating. And it was because they were using it to mine Bitcoin in the background for the game. So people's Switches would overheat and turn off, and they couldn't figure out why, because it's not like, the Switch is like that big. It's not like it's a PS5 or something. Yeah. So people were like, what's going on here? And they looked into it, and they were mining Bitcoin in the background when you played the game. It was insane.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary. It really is. Yeah. For those who see cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin as the currency of the future, it should be noted that a currency needs stability so that merchants and consumers can determine what a fair price for goods is. So let's take the instance of Tesla. So they're going to be selling a car, and they're going to price the cost in Bitcoin out to what the equivalent dollar value would be. So let's say, for instance, you buy a Tesla for $80,000. Let's say that's, for the sake of easy math, that's 8 Bitcoin. All right. Say Bitcoin's at $10,000 each. Well, if Bitcoin drops in value at any point in time while you're still paying for that car, then you just got, like, if it drops to 5,000 per Bitcoin, you just paid half price for that car. What merchant is going to deal with a currency that's that volatile and that prone to have them lose money? Like, it just, for Tesla to go that route, I think puzzled a lot of people.
Do you think that it's going to end up becoming regulated if enough businesses get involved? Do you think it's just going to sidestep the government and they're just going to regulate it themselves? Especially if they have the majority of it, like a Tesla or another big corporation?
Well, and that's actually a very interesting proposition. You can't regulate it. You can't, because of its decentralized nature. So even if you own the majority of it, like owning the majority of a company, you control that company. If you own the majority of Bitcoin, you can't dictate the price of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is only worth what the market will bear. So if Tesla owned 60% of the available Bitcoin out there, they could ask whatever they want. But if nobody wants to pay that value, then it's not worth that, right? Like, think of selling on eBay. Oh, I can put my Star Wars figures up on eBay and ask $5,000 for them. Doesn't mean they're worth $5,000 if nobody's going to buy them. And that's what you're looking at with Bitcoin, is that you can't deregulate. So I don't know why at this point in time someone like Elon Musk would get into it, if for no other reason than just for publicity.
I'm pretty sure he had an SEC filing the other day where they have to call him like Crypto King now or something like that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which one of my friends, it was half joking, but he was like, well, that's so they don't have to say he's a CEO. So when he does dumb stuff like this, he can say, well, I'm not CEO, I'm the Crypto King.
Right.
It's different.
Right. But I don't know. He does things like, I mean, this is the man who sold flamethrowers to promote his boring company, his mining company. So
we could do a whole show on him if we wanted to.
Yeah.
He's like Tony Stark, but not as cool.
But as we said, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have been anything but stable through much of their history. For example, while Bitcoin traded close to $20,000 in December 2017, by 2020 it was trading at record levels. It dropped as low as $3,200 later that year. That's 70% of your value. That's ridiculous to have a drop like that. And then by 2020, it was back at record levels again. So the price volatility creates a conundrum. Hence the title to the show.
Hey-o.
See, you
Full
made fun of me
circle.
for the title.
I did make fun. It was funny.
If Bitcoins might be worth a lot more in the future, people are less likely to spend and circulate them today. So I'm going to stop buying pizzas with my Bitcoin. I'm going to hold on to them, making them less viable as a currency. So think of it almost like a commodity, like gold. So gold rarely drops in value. And what happens is a lot of people buy gold and they hold on to it because it's a good investment because it doesn't drop in value. Nobody deals in gold as a currency anymore. It's not practical to deal in it. But because it's stable, people are going to hold on to that and use that to back other ventures. Because this is volatile and could drop or increase dramatically, people don't want to spend that because they don't want to spend $20,000 on a pizza. Even though it may only be $20 today, a year from now it could be $20,000. So it doesn't lend itself to being used to transmit money. And finally, they say, why spend a Bitcoin when it would be worth 3 times that value next year? And that's exactly what they're saying. It's more an investment gimmick, I think, than it is a real currency.
So then do you think it will go by the wayside eventually? If people adopt this line of thinking that it's not worth the effort to spend it?
I think Bitcoin has a very limited lifetime to it. I think cryptocurrency in general does. I think blockchain has other practical applications that can be used for more realistic things. I think what we're seeing right now with crypto is probably a fad because it's just too unstable. Yeah. Investors don't like instability. So you're going to find that it's going to probably lose its widespread adoption pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But let's take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll look at what we do think of what the future of cryptocurrency is and how it's changing the world.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We're talking cryptocurrency. And as we said earlier, cryptocurrency is not new. It's been around since roughly 2009 when Bitcoin was first created. But in recent years, it started to have a more significant impact on the world. Cryptocurrency has done this by changing the way various industries operate and opening up new opportunities for individuals and businesses alike. The creation of cryptocurrency also introduced blockchain technology to the world, which is, I think, the most significant contribution that we get from crypto. According to Statista, revenues from the technology are expected to reach more than $39 billion by 2025, From these figures, it's clear that cryptocurrencies and the technology that surround them are having a major impact. Here are some of the examples of how cryptocurrencies changing the world. Why don't you tell us about these?
Sure. So alternative international financial transactions, which we kind of talked about earlier with it being a borderless currency. Businesses are always keen to find a way to complete international transactions in the most secure way possible. So cryptocurrency-based solutions like Ripple can help with this. Ripple operates on an open source platform, and it enables the seamless transfer of both cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Litecoin and fiat money like USD and yen. I don't know what fiat money is.
Fiat money is national currency.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that was a term for it. And then finally, the main process of Ripple is payment, settlement, and remittance that is similar to the traditional SWIFT system, which is used by financial institutions. What is the SWIFT system also?
Well, SWIFT system we're not going to go into today.
Okay.
That's a lot more complicated.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get an economist next time to break that down for us.
Yes.
Second, more options for secure online payments. Cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology can make it easier for people to make online payments. Blockchain wallets store private and public keys that enable payments to be made securely and quickly. Also, many sites in various industries accept cryptocurrencies as a safe way for people to send and deposit money. So, for example, online gambling sites that accept cryptocurrencies are popular among young adults and in general with players due to the added security that is provided. The worldwide online payment system PayPal has also recently announced that it is going to start allowing customers to buy, sell, and hold cryptocurrencies in its online wallets. PayPal was Elon Musk, right? He invented that?
I believe that's where he started.
So yeah, another Elon, he's back. Another mention of him. Revolutionizing supply chains. So Bitcoin, the global economy, is reliant on secure and efficient supply chains. This makes supply chain security a major concern. The blockchain technology that enables the use of crypto can also be used to improve the security of supply chains thanks to its transparency and decentralized nature. Certain currencies like Walton Chain and VeChain, or VeChain, are specifically aimed at improving the safety and speed of supply chain operation. Providing a platform for creatives, it can often be difficult for professionals like musicians to sell content without interference from middlemen like producers. So they can use crypto like XRP to allow them to sell content directly to consumers. This is because consumers can access the content and pay for it using a real-world payment solution. That's an interesting note. I never thought of that, of how it can be used to actually help people that might be, scammed by a producer or something like that. Changing the way NGOs deal with money. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, engage with crypto as a way of getting currency to underprivileged areas of the world. During the current crisis, the Red Cross in Italy has also started accepting Bitcoin donations from people in order to boost its fund and help it provide the support that people need. So using it for more humanitarian efforts.
Sure. And the other thing we kind of have to make note of here is that we talk a lot about Bitcoin because that's in the news a lot. And Bitcoin's a form of crypto, but it's obviously not the only version. Crypto in general can be used for other different things depending on how it's generated. Like, for instance, we talked how Bitcoin has a finite number of Bitcoins that you can ever get out of the blockchain. But other currencies like Dogecoin, it's unlimited. So you can continue to generate Dogecoin, which is why the value never really soars, because there's an infinite amount of it out there. But it's also a legitimate form of currency because it is digitally signed through a very strong encryption. So something like that, you can easily use that to do electronic transactions back and forth online, or to transfer large sums of money, or things like that, where you want to have secure, borderless transactions. That's not to say that Bitcoin's the best crypto for that, but crypto can be used for these things. It does away with that decentralized bank. It does away with these conversions. It does away with the regulations that you get bogged down in. One example, which is probably not a good example, is North Korea. Okay, so North Korea is under all kinds of sanctions. They can't trade, tea at this point in time without having some kind of sanction slapped on them. But they can trade crypto because it's unregulated.
Yeah.
There's no way to stop that.
I didn't even think of that.
Now, that's a bad example of that, but the good example of that is if you're in a oppressive third world regime. that you're trying to fight for the freedom of the people there and the government is oppressing you. You can fund those operations through cryptocurrencies and still manage to get the funds that you need.
Yeah, it sort of cuts out the red tape and the middleman and all that to just get the currency where it needs to be.
Exactly. I think personally moving forward, cryptocurrencies themselves are going to be more of a medium than they are an asset or an investment. They're going to be used for transactions. Like a lot of business transactions use EFT fund transactions now, and you get a lot of hands touching that type of stuff through the banking industries. And I think cryptocurrencies eliminate a lot of that stuff. So I think there's a future for cryptocurrencies. I think it's very different than what we see today. I think we're going to see them take on a different role. I think we're going to see them be used by different people for different reasons. I don't think they're going to be a viable investment anytime in the near future just because of the volatility. But one of the things that we are seeing crypto use for, and again, this is a different use of blockchains, is something called an NFT or a non-fungible token. And these are a type of cryptocurrency created on smart contract platforms such as Ethereum. And they're unique digital objects that can be cool to own or even profitable to trade.
Like it's World of Warcraft or something.
Similar to that. I mean, you joke, really? But it's similar to that. But for instance, Elon Musk's girlfriend was just in the news because she put up $8 million in artwork as NFTs. The NBA is involved in this. You can purchase an NFT, a non-fungible token of an NBA highlight, and you own that highlight.
Like the footage?
No, just the rights to the highlight.
Okay.
This is where it gets confusing.
Yeah, I'm kind of lost.
Think of it as, let's go back to the analogy of baseball cards. All right. So as a kid, I would buy baseball cards. You'd go out to the store, you'd buy a pack of them. You'd open them up and you'd see what card you got. And if you got a rookie card of somebody that you knew was good, you held on to it and it had value. I could take that to a trading card store somewhere and sell it. This is sort of the same type of thing, but you never get the card. So, for instance, you pay for an NFT, and that NFT happens to be for, I say Ricky Henderson because that's the only valuable baseball card I ever owned. So you pay for a token, a digital token for Ricky Henderson's rookie card. And that card stays in the store in the window, and everyone can come by and they can look at that and they can gawk at it and they can ooh and ah and everything, but nobody can have it. They can just see it. You own it. Now you can trade it to someone else. You can sell it to someone else. You can sell that right to it, but you never actually own it.
That sounds lame. Why would you want to do that? Especially if it's like Grimes' artwork. Wouldn't you want to hang artwork like in your house? You just have a thing that says you own the artwork. You don't own the art.
Well, and that's like, you can have copies of it, but you own the right to that item itself. So no one else can own the right to it.
It seems like a pyramid scheme or something.
And that's how it's been described.
You own
by
the
a lot
idea
of
of art.
That's how it's been described. So what is fungible and non-fungible?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Oh, well, conveniently enough, we have a very well-produced show notes. Cryptocurrencies can be fungible, meaning all the currency's unit, i.e. tokens, are the same and equal, like grains of rice or dollars. Non-fungible tokens are the opposite. Every cryptocurrency unit or token is unique and cannot be replicated. This, quote, non-fungible property can be used for many things, even certain types of currencies. But the current NFT craze is mostly fueled by digital art and collectibles, kind of like we talked about. People have figured out that a unique digital object can be interesting, cool, and even have a significant monetary value. It's why the space has recently blossomed, encompassing thousands of projects involving artworks, gaming, and sports.
So how do NFTs work? So it really depends on the platform, right? So given the vast majority of NFTs that are created and traded on Ethereum, let's focus on that. So NFTs created on Ethereum's blockchain, which is immutable, meaning it can't be altered, like we've talked about all blockchains. No one can undo your ownership of an NFT or recreate the same one. They're also quote, permissionless. So anyone can create, buy, or sell an NFT without asking for permission. So if you're an artist, you can create your own NFTs. You don't have to license it through someone else.
So how does that work with like the NBA?
So the NBA creates their NFTs for these highlights.
Okay.
And they're the only ones that can create their NFTs.
Right. Gotcha.
They're the authority for it. Every NFT is unique and can be viewed by anyone, just like that card in the window. Anyone can walk by the window. So again, it's like the analogy I gave you with having a card that's forever available for people to use. I don't know why people would do it.
Yeah.
People are doing it. There's a huge budding industry, which is why I threw it in at the end of the notes here, because it kind of was an afterthought in my research in doing this. But I wanted to put it in here as another example of how blockchain itself is being used without it being technically a cryptocurrency. And I guess, let's take a step back and talk about where we think it's going to go. So we're going to take a quick break. Our last break, we'll come back and we'll talk about what the future of cryptocurrency is going to look like. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com. Investopedia.com says that the economic analysts predict a big change in crypto is forthcoming as institutional money enters the market. There's the possibility of crypto will be floated on the NASDAQ, which would further add credibility to blockchain and its uses as an alternative to conventional currencies. Some predict that all crypto needs to be a verified exchange-traded fund, an ETF. An ETF would definitely make it easier for people to invest in Bitcoin, but there still needs to be the demand to want to invest in crypto, which might not automatically be generated with a fund. What do you think? Where do you think we're going to go with crypto based on the discussion that we had here? What do you think its future is?
Well, I didn't know a whole lot about it going in, and I've definitely learned a lot today. So I said I'd probably agree with a lot of what you're saying, is that it seems like it's the blockchain element of it seems like it's useful and can be used for lots of other things. But breaking it down in terms of the actual reasons to invest in it, and there not really being that many, and the volatility of it too, I think unless there's a change in that and how that works, which I don't know how you do that, it seems like, the best thing we're getting out of this is the blockchain technology. Right.
Yeah, and Investopedia looks specifically at the outlook for Bitcoin, and they say the future outlook for Bitcoin is it's subject to much debate, which we kind of agreed on here. While the financial media is proliferated by so-called crypto evangelists, Harvard University professor of economics and public policy Kenneth Rogoff suggests the, quote, overwhelming sentiment among crypto advocates is that the total market capitalization of cryptocurrencies could explode over the next 5 years, rising to $5 to $10 trillion, which is, astronomical. The historic volatility of the asset class is no reason to panic, he says. So he tempered his optimism with that of the crypto evangelists' view of Bitcoin as digital gold, calling it, quote, nutty.
Yeah, that's the official economist term.
That is the official term, yeah. stating its long-term value is more likely to be $100 than $100,000. Rogoff argues that unlike physical gold, Bitcoin's use is limited to transactions, which makes it more vulnerable to a bubble-like collapse. Additionally, the cryptocurrency's energy-intensive verification process is vastly less efficient than systems that rely on a trusted central authority like a central bank. And I think that's really a great place to make that distinction, is that the value or the viability of a Bitcoin is in its computational authority, whereas the value of a traditional currency or stock is in its institutional authority. And being decentralized with no institutional authority, you have to rely on that encryption to know what the value is and to know that it's a legitimate transaction. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, even this guy that we just quoted, he starts off with towards the more optimistic side, saying, it could be trillions of dollars in the next couple of years. But then once he thinks about it, it seems like he tempers it, being like, well, it's also very volatile. And, he'd say the word bubble. And that kind of got me thinking of, like, maybe this is a bubble. Maybe it has the chance to collapse. And especially with it being like so nebulous too, that it might even lend itself further to a collapse. Like, .com and things like that back in, what was it, the 90s, right? When that happened?
Late 90s, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe, I mean, I hope that doesn't happen, because it seems like it's interesting technology. I hope that it doesn't completely collapse. And if it does collapse, maybe it can come back in some way. But yeah, it just seems like overall it's better to just be safe than sorry.
Sure. Yeah. I think, we both agree that there's probably a lot more scrutiny to be paid to this. Bitcoin's main benefits of decentralization and transaction anonymity have also made it a favored currency for a host of illegal activities, including money laundering, drug peddling, smuggling, and weapons procurement. This has attracted the attention of powerful regulatory and other government agencies, such as the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the SEC, and even the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. In March of 2013, when this was an infant state here, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network issued rules that defined virtual currency exchanges and administrators as money service businesses, bringing them within the jurisdiction of government regulation. In May of that year, the Department of Homeland Security froze an account of Mt. Gox, the largest Bitcoin exchange at the time, that was held at Wells Fargo, alleging that it broke anti-money laundering laws. New York's Department of Financial Services issued subpoenas to 22 emerging payment companies, many of which handled Bitcoin, asking about their measures to prevent money laundering and ensure consumer protection. So these are very real cases out there that the government, fearing what you can do with this cryptocurrency, and they're fearing it under the guise of illegal activity, which is legitimate, but their fear goes a lot deeper than just illegal activity. Their fear goes to a lack of control, a lack of regulation. I mean, the federal government does not like things it can't regulate. Yeah,
and it seems like they're most likely going to use the crime angle to get their foot in the door, right, for increased regulation.
And they were doing the same exact thing with encryption on your personal phones. And even the encryption on your phones, they're taking it even a step further, and they're hammering home this whole idea of child pornography and child exploitation. And that's why, let's do it for the children.
Think of the children, yeah.
Right. And that's really what they're hammering home to try to crack your encryption. But we're looking at the same type of thing here. So I think unregulated currencies like Bitcoin that are speculative and have a potential for high value are much more likely to come under the scrutiny of the government than a transactional thing like Dogecoin, where people are using it for legitimate things, and it doesn't have enough power behind it to really warrant being used for illegal activity. Right. But again, in the end, I think it's really the technology that comes out of this that's going to be the winner overall. I think cryptocurrencies I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon, but they're not changing the economy anytime soon. Governments just aren't going to allow it.
Yeah, it seems like it would be that simple, right? They could just say no.
Yeah. So what are your final thoughts on cryptocurrency?
Well, I definitely learned a lot about it today. That was kind of nice. And I hope that our viewers learned something too, if they were as clueless as I was. But yeah, I mean, it seems like it's not as future proof as, some of the jokes about it might make it seem like. But blockchain seems like it could be used for a lot of really good things, and hopefully good things. And I'm curious to see where governments take it in the next 5 to 10 years. If we do end up getting, that $1 trillion level that economist was talking about, how governments are going to respond to that, and how they're going to take it seriously, or, try to outlaw it or ban it, and, around the world, and how that's going to affect it. All that is interesting to me. So yeah, it's just a matter of, see where it goes.
Yeah, and I agree. I think a wait and see attitude is probably the best. I think we should not let Elon Musk, people of Elon Musk's nature lead the charge on this. Between selling flamethrowers and launching his Sportster into space for media gimmicks and stuff like that, I don't really think he's the authority that we want to use in this case here. I think it's probably best to, if you're interested in investing in it, I would suggest you do so very cautiously. I would not liquidate your 401k and dump it into Bitcoin, that's for sure. But, it's speculative. There's a chance that you could make some money off of it today. Why not get in on it like everyone else does if you do it smartly? So, but that's all we had today. Did you have anything else you wanted to discuss?
No, I think we did it.
All right. I think that is it. Before we go, I would ask folks once again to subscribe to the podcast. Audio versions can be found as Insights into Tomorrow. Video versions as Insights into Things. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and any place you get your podcast feeds from. I would also ask you to give us your feedback. Let us know how we're doing. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can get us on Twitter at insights_things. We stream 6 days a week on Twitch when I don't have technical difficulties like this week. On Twitch, we are at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. If you have a Amazon Prime membership, you do get a free Twitch Prime monthly. We would love it if you sent that our way. Helps us to keep the lights on around here. And we have a lot of really bright, hot lights around here we have to keep on. We don't use it to mine Bitcoin. I promise you that. You can get us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothings podcast. We're on Instagram at insightsintothings. You can get us on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. And that's it. We're done. Another one in the books.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com. Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 13, Modern Monopolies. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen. How you doing today, Sam?
Doing okay. How you doing?
Doing all right. So today's topic is one that we've kind of been tossing around for a little while now, and it's in the news a lot lately with a lot of the tech companies and politics involved. It came to the forefront few months back during the Trump administration. They were kind of going up against some of the big tech companies, Facebook, Amazon, Google, and so forth. So I thought it was worthwhile to sort of take a look at this. So today we're going to discuss what monopolies are in the modern age. We'll understand what a monopoly is, how they operate, and why they're detrimental to a free and open market. Yet they're a unique product of capitalism. We'll take a brief look at the history of monopolies in America and how they've been handled before. And we'll look at the future of what today's monopolies and the complications inherent in regulating them are. Ready to get started?
Yep.
All right. So what is a monopoly? So in doing research for today's episode, I went to a couple of different sites, and this definition, I think, captured it best. It came from Investopedia.com. They say a monopoly refers to when a company and its product offerings dominate a sector or industry. Monopolies can be considered an extreme result of free market capitalism in that, absent any restrictions or restraints, a single company or group becomes large enough to own all or nearly all the market, goods, supplies, commodities, infrastructure, so forth, for a particular type of product or service. The term monopoly is often used to describe an entity that has total or near control of a market. Natural monopolies can exist where there are high barriers to entry, a company has a patent on their products, or is allowed by governments to provide essential services. So based on that definition, let me ask you real quick, do you think we have modern monopolies that fit this bill?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think it takes that long to figure it out. There's like 3 drugstores. That's the first one that came to mind for me. Like if you think about it, Rite Aid, Walgreens, and CVS. That's just an example. Airlines too. Like if you just, I don't know, I feel like if you just think about it, there's pretty clear examples of at least a handful.
Sure, yeah. So in understanding a monopoly is characterized by the absence of competition, which can lead to high costs for consumers, inferior products and services, and corrupt behavior. A company that dominates a business sector or industry can use that dominance to its advantage and at the expense of others. So taking your example of the drugstores, if there are 3 drugstores that control all the pharmaceuticals to consumers, is that really a monopoly if there's 3 of them?
I think it's a monopoly if by there being 3 and they're being so established that it eliminates the ability for other new drugstores to rise up. I think that's where you get into the monopoly territory if they're creating that barrier of entry.
So it's in that case, it's a monopoly of 3 where they're colluding to prevent competition at that point in time, essentially.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
They also say that it can create artificial scarcities, fix prices, and circumvent natural laws of supply and demand, which I think is exactly where your pharmacy scenario falls into place. It can impede new entrants into the field, discriminate and inhibit experimentation on or new product development, while the public, robbed of the recourse of using a competitor, is at its mercy. do you think, again, sticking with our pharmacy example, do you think that the consumers are at a detriment because of having three major pharmacies control the entire industry?
I'm not so sure about that because, I mean, the medication is still, as long as the medication's effective from pharmacy to pharmacy, that's the important thing. I mean, it's not like you're getting like faulty products. Now, if, say, for example, Walgreens had their over-the-counter allergy medication and it was defective, but there's only Walgreens in your area, that's where you run into some issues. But I think as long as the products are still working, then, I mean, monopolies are still generally bad, but I think in that example, you could probably get away with it.
Well, how about an example where you've got three pharmacies and they all decide that instead of selling your allergy medicine to you at 20% over cost, with a 20% margin, they're going to up it to 50%. They're all going to sell for 50%. So there's no one in the market that the consumer can go to get it at that reduced price. Do you think that would be monopolistic?
Yeah, definitely. Because at that point, they're using their hold on the industry to screw over the customer, which is where you get into like the definition of monopolies.
Exactly. Yeah. So they go on to say that a monopolized market often becomes an unfair, unequal, and inefficient market. Mergers and acquisitions among companies in the same business are highly regulated and researched for this reason. Firms are typically forced to divest assets if federal authorities believe proposed mergers or a takeover will violate anti-monopoly laws. We just had a major takeover very recently among the cellular carriers.
Oh, yeah.
Where T-Mobile bought out Sprint. So we had four major competitors in the market. T-Mobile bought out Sprint to become the number 2 in consumer size at that point in time, and to reduce the market down from 4 to 3. At the same time, one of the contingencies associated with that was the emergence of another network that would come out eventually, which it hasn't come out yet. I think it's Dish is going to be running this particular network, but they're going to be using the services of the existing networks. So it's almost like it was a fictional way of putting a fourth competitor into the market.
Mm-hmm. Like a puppet competitor almost.
Exactly. So in that instance, do you think the T-Mobile merger with Sprint will be good or bad for consumers?
I think about this with mobile companies especially. Like there's whole regions of the country where you can only get one mobile service provider. And I think by merging like that, it's going to make that problem even worse. So say I know in this area it's kind of like that with T-Mobile. If you're forced to have T-Mobile and now Sprint, but the coverage is poor and you don't have any other option, I think that's definitely an issue.
Yeah.
It's because you're forced to have an inferior product just due to the monopoly. Right.
And there's no incentive for them to improve their product because there's no competition.
Right. And what are you going to do? Move?
Exactly. You're not going to move because you're a cellular carrier. Exactly. So they see monopolies typically have an unfair advantage over their competition since they're either the only provider of a product or control most of the market share or customers for their product. Although monopolies might differ from industry to industry, they tend to share similar characteristics. Why don't you tell us what these characteristics are?
Sure. So the first one is the high barrier of entry, which we kind of talked about already. This is when competitors are not able to enter the market, and the monopoly can easily prevent competition from developing their foothold in an industry by acquiring that competition. Sort of like we talked about with the mobile company where they put, I guess not really, because they kind of let them use their own services. The second example is the single seller. There's only one seller in the market, meaning the company becomes the same as the industry it serves. The third is price maker. The company that operates the monopoly decides the price of the product that it will sell without any competition, keeping their prices in check. As a result of this, monopolies can raise prices whenever they want. And finally, the economy of scale. A monopoly often can produce at a lower cost than smaller companies. Monopolies can buy huge quantities of inventory, for example, usually at a volume discount. As a result of this, monopoly can lower its prices so much that smaller competitors can survive. Think like Walmart. Essentially, monopolies can engage in price wars due to their scale of their manufacturing and distribution networks, such as warehousing and shipping. That can be done at lower cost than any of the competitors in the industry. I guess that'd be Amazon too, both those companies.
Yeah. So it's interesting because some of these same practices they talk about here that are considered to be monopolistic are also ones that are generally used in business for efficiency reasons. For instance, here in New Jersey, we have a lot of cranberry producers in the state. And one of the things that you have is everyone's heard of Ocean Spray, right? Mm-hmm. You buy Ocean Spray cranberry juice off the shelves and whatnot. Ocean Spray is actually a cooperative. And what they do is they partner with a number of independent farmers to pool their resources. And it's not just cranberries, obviously, it's many other things. But they pool their resources together and sell as one single entity so they can get advantages in the economy to scale by supplying all their entities at the same time for a bulk cost. They're sort of fixing their prices by not competing against each other. They all agree upon a certain price that they sell at. But somehow the cooperatives aren't targeted for monopolies, even though they take on some of the same characteristics of a monopoly. This has happened traditionally in the past with a lot of food industries have done this. A lot of your fast food places, when they go through franchising, they do sort of the same thing. You buy a franchise of a pizza place, Papa John's or I can't think of another
Dunkin'
one.
Donuts.
That would not be pizza, but sure, we'll use that as a franchise.
Yeah. That's the first thing when I think franchise.
But yeah, that's another good example of you have a whole bunch of people that buy the stores, buy the franchise where they have the rights, but they also get all their supplies that way. So instead of, mom and pop down the street going out and buying flour to make donuts, they put their purchase into the corporation, and the corporation buys it for 500 bakers at one time and can get a discount on it. So that's another thing where cooperatives can be targeted as monopolies, but they're not in today's society. So the next thing that we talk about is what's called a natural monopoly. So a natural monopoly can develop when a company becomes a monopoly due to high fixed or startup costs in an industry. This happens a lot with utilities, internet, electricity, telephone. Because of the amount of money that you have to tie up in order to provide that service, the government is willing to allow you to become a monopoly. AT&T at one point in time had so much money tied up in copper. It was like 1/3 of the company's value was in copper, just in the wires that they had, because copper is a commodity.
Wow.
Also, natural monopolies can arise in industries that require unique raw materials, technology, or it's a specialized industry where only one company can meet the needs. Again, this goes back to AT&T. They were Bell, I guess at the time and they wound up getting broken up in the early 80s. Companies that have patents on their products, which prevent competition from developing the same product in a specific field, can have a natural monopoly. So a lot of these things here have traditionally been associated with the utilities sector. Your television, your cable, your internet, your electrical, your plumbing, things that aren't state-owned but offer private services. We just ran into an incident last week with the Colonial Pipeline, where they supply a chunk of refined fuels to a large sector of the country. They're a private company, but they have a monopoly on that because of how expensive it is to build a pipeline. So let me ask you, when it comes to natural monopolies where you have this investment or you own the technology, do you think that justifies monopolistic tendencies?
I think that's a tough question to answer, because it reminds me of when we did our streaming services episode. We talked about something like Comcast, who's internet and TV and there's cell phones, and they're sort of expanding in that way too. But if, again, kind of like when we talked about with the mobile providers, if you can only have Comcast, but it's because Comcast controls all those resources. Is that a bad thing? I think it becomes a bad thing when you go back to the inferior product thing. If your product's bad, but you have this obligation to provide the service because you have all the resources, then I think you also have an obligation to make the product at least usable consistently.
Well, and to add to that is, if the government is going to allow you to be a natural monopoly because of that technology or that investment, then there's a certain right that the government has to...
we didn't check the shop beforehand, everybody.
No, we didn't. Just lean a lot that way. There's a certain obligation the government has to regulate you at that point in time as an industry. Do you think that expectation of government regulation, because a lot of the cable companies are trying to get away from government regulation, do you think that expectation that government should have the right to do that when they grant you a monopoly is realistic?
I think maybe not realistic, not in these days, because these companies have so much power. I think it's idealistic that, ultimately at the end of the day, the government is going to have the say in what needs to be regulated and what doesn't. But I think we're seeing so often that the companies have so much power that the government just chooses not to do anything.
Yeah, I think
which we'll get into more later.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that one. So there's public monopolies that are set up by the government to provide essential services, such as the U.S. Postal Service, although the U.S. Postal Service is getting a run for its money these days with private parcel companies like UPS and FedEx. Utilities, which we talked about already. The utilities industry is where a natural government allowed monopolies flourish until the government doesn't allow it anymore. And it's kind of strange because this happened a few years back, where back in the early 2000s, we had a major power outage in the Northeast. And it turned out that power outage was a result of a mismanaged power network out in, I think, Ohio at the time. And it's a privately owned company. They weren't under any kind of monopolistic regulations or anything. But because of the problem that they caused that took down the rest of the network in the Northeast, the government came in and imposed sanctions on them and fines and so forth. Do you think that's a way or an efficient way for the government to sort of allow monopolies to happen, but penalize them if they don't adhere to some level of standard?
I mean, yeah. And I mean, that's a pretty extreme example. If you cause, the Northeast to have a blackout, I think you deserve to get punished for some reason. But I think you said it was a privately owned company. It wasn't like, yeah. So if it was, I don't know. I think if it was a larger company, they might not be as harsh. If it's the small independent company, they can easily point the finger and blame them. But if it was something like General Electric or something, they might be a little bit hesitant to punish them as harshly, I think.
Right. No, I could see that. So the monopolies in these instances are allowed because the suppliers incur large costs of producing power or water or providing these services to each household. And it's considered more efficient for there to be a sole provider for these services. Do you think it's more efficient for you to have a sole cable provider? Or do you think competition in the cable market would be better for the consumers? Because right now, cable is not considered a public utility. And there's a lot of push to have it considered that way as far as protections and regulation go. If they did, do you think having 2 or 3 cable providers would be better, or having a monopoly would be better?
Yeah, definitely, because I think competition, it breeds innovation, right? Because you need to be able to beat your competitor, and you beat your competitor by making more money, which means having a better product in theory. So I think if there was only one company, then it would just stagnate. They would settle for whatever service they're going to provide. But if you've got that competition, I think that ends up benefiting the consumer in the long run.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the only time you get innovation is when companies have to innovate. And the only time companies have to innovate is if the competition makes them, which is their number one motivation, because that's where their profits are, or if the government forces them to. And to a certain extent, the government did force a lot of these cable companies to innovate their technology because they were taking bandwidth back from them, which is why we have digital TV now. That was not because the cable companies were in competition for each other to provide better services. that was because the government mandated that. So you can, in certain circumstances, still have monopolies that innovate when the government forces them to do so, and still allow monopolies to exist in the country. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk about some of the antitrust laws and a little bit of what the country has done to break up monopolies historically.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We're talking modern day monopolies today. We're going to talk a little bit about antitrust laws, and you can't really talk about monopolies unless you mention at least the Sherman Antitrust Act. So in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act became the first legislation passed by the U.S. Congress to limit monopolies. It had strong support by Congress. It passed the Senate with a vote of 51-1 and passed the House unanimously 242-0. And that was put in place to regulate mostly the big industries at the time, which were oil, locomotives, your rail service, your steel industry, and so forth. Then in 1914, two additional antitrust pieces of legislation were passed to protect consumers. The Clayton Antitrust Act, which created new rules for mergers and corporate directors, and also listed specific examples of practices that would violate the Sherman Antitrust. And then the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Trade Commission Act, which sets standards for business practices and enforces the two antitrust acts, along with the Antitrust Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. So the laws are intended to preserve competition and allow smaller companies to enter a market, and not to merely suppress strong companies. And I think that's a theme that I think resonates today, because a lot of what people are talking about today with our big monopolies is that they're not harming people because they're not producing a product or a service. And the biggest example of this would be social media and Facebook. So Facebook isn't harming anyone by not bringing new products to market. They're just a really big company. The same thing with Google. And the push today seems to be targeting, well, these companies are too big and they shouldn't be that big. And I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that's not something that the antitrust laws are designed to cope with. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's these are obviously laws that were made in before 1900, so they definitely need to be updated. But I think it's kind of what comes with technology, right? It's you've got to make new laws. You've got to adapt the way you think about it, because while they're not making a product, these companies have data on everybody. And when you have things like information leaks and the companies aren't necessarily held accountable, like Facebook has them all the time, where people's personal data gets leaked. And I think that is a huge problem that should be, more harshly punished. And I think that would come with a more modern look at, antitrust laws.
Well, and I think I agree with you to a certain extent that the companies themselves have a certain obligation to protect the user's data. However, the users give the data up freely. So there's not I don't think there's really an expectation of privacy because it's a social network, right?
Yeah.
So when I post my information, my pictures and whatever, I'm posting them there for people to see. So I can't really get upset when Facebook leaks that to other people. The other problem that you run into is that the modern laws that we have penalties that are insignificant to the size of these companies now, which I think is where some of the argument comes in that these companies are too big. You know, you might get a couple $100,000 fine for a data breach.
That's like nothing.
When you're a multi-billion-dollar company, that's, essentially you lost that money in the cushions of the couch.
Yeah, the time it took to draft the document to charge you've already made $1 billion.
Right. So there's really very little incentive to do anything other than continue business as is and just pay the fines because you're still monumentally profitable. So I think there needs to be a fundamental shift in what the penalties look like in order for the penalties to have any meaning whatsoever. So in talking about breaking up monopolies, the Sherman Antitrust Act was targeted at companies like Standard Oil and even the American Tobacco Company, which didn't break up the companies. It broke up Standard Oil, but what it did was it pushed more public awareness. In 1994, the U.S. government accused Microsoft of using a significant market share in the PC operating system business to prevent competition and maintain a monopoly. Now, this is significant because I think it's really the first modern monopoly with high-tech industry that we kind of see come across the government's crosshairs. Yeah, they broke up the bell companies, the phone companies and stuff like that, but I think that was less significant from a technological standpoint because it was really legacy technology. But here you have Microsoft, who is at the forefront of computer technology, but they're also internationally acclaimed for this technology. And you have the United States that's trying to set precedent here. And I think, if anything, that's where we kind of look back to see what's going to guide our principles moving forward. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I've said it on this show before. Again, not a lawyer, but, the law is about precedent, right? So something like this case here, sets the precedent for technology companies going forward of how their versions of monopolies, are viewed in courts. And I think that, having Microsoft be this big example in 1994 is extremely important, just to have something to look back at, especially, I don't think anybody could have imagined what technology is like now compared to what it was in 1994, but it's much larger and much more in the forefront of just our daily conversations.
Yeah, and essentially what happened is in 98, you had a federal district judge rule that Microsoft needed to be broken into technology companies. But that was a decision that was later reversed. There were compromises that happened. There were fines that happened. Microsoft ultimately agreed to have a government overseer become part of the company to make sure that the company wasn't engaging in monopolistic activities. Microsoft in the 80s and 90s was brutal. They had a philosophy of, well, let's not compete with others. Let's just destroy the competition. And they did. They were very effective at it.
Yeah, I think there's an episode. I don't know if you've ever watched the CNN series. It's just called the 70s or the 80s. It's one of those. There's a whole episode on like the Apple-Microsoft war. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's funny because Microsoft destroyed Apple to the point that Apple was roughly 3 months away from going bankrupt. And Bill Gates, in a very famous appearance, shows up at the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference via video. And Steve Jobs was still alive at the time and announced that Microsoft is investing in Apple. And they booed Bill Gates for saving the company. All the people that were in the crowd booed when they heard about that. And the funny thing is, the only reason Microsoft did that was not so that they could make profit off of Apple. It was so that they could maintain the appearance
of having competition.
That's all it was. And the government fell for it. Yeah, the government fell for it. So, I mean, a lot of times it's really just about, jumping through the flaming hoops and making people believe the right thing.
Yeah, and like not even in terms of government, but just in terms of public opinion too. You have you get that with video game consoles too. I know it's not nearly on the same level, but if you maintain that rivalry between two companies, it makes it look even better than that you're not a monopoly because, I'm an Apple fan, I'm a Microsoft fan, but in reality, it's the same company. Like, not really, but if they bailed out your company, they still owe them a debt in some way.
Sure. Well, and you look at, we stick with technology, you look at microprocessors. So you've got Intel and you've got AMD. And AMD has always been sort of the redheaded stepchild to Intel, where they were the rebels, they were the underdogs. Their processors were for like the elite group of gamers or overclockers or whatever. And you look at what happened to Intel, and Intel has, in recent years, been completely burned by their technology choices because of the shortcuts that they made that AMD didn't make. And AMD picked up a huge market share. And now you're seeing another fundamental shift that's detrimental to Intel, with Apple moving away from Intel processors in their computers now to their own designed ones that they're manufacturing themselves. So Intel's getting hit again with this. So this was an instance where Intel got very complacent in what they were doing, and now they've fallen significantly behind in the processor market, and the tables have kind of shifted. But at the time when Intel was dominant, Intel was actually supplying information and support to AMD to maintain that appearance of competition.
Works every time.
So again, it really is. It's just a matter of appearance sometimes to keep from getting hit with monopolistic charges. So we talked briefly about AT&T. The most prominent monopoly breakup in the U.S. history was AT&T. After being allowed to control the nation's telephone service for decades as a government-supported monopoly, the giant telecommunications company found itself challenged by antitrust laws. In 1982, after an 8-year court battle, AT&T had to divest itself of 22 local exchange service companies and has been forced to sell off assets or split units several times since. Now, the real interesting thing is, you had what were termed as baby bells during this. So you had all these certified local exchange CLECs, certified local exchange carriers pop up all over the country that were all part of the original one. And over the last 10 to 15 years, you've seen all those get swept up, and they're now owned by Verizon. So you went through that huge natural monopoly that the government allowed, to breaking them up when they thought the competition was stifled, to now mergers happening to get you back to that position where you have two people that are running the...
Yeah, it's history in general is cyclical, and I think we're seeing that here too, right? So in maybe, 15, 20 years, we'll have another breakup and they'll all come back out again, and then in 30 years, they'll all get swept up again. I think that's just how these things work,
and
honestly.
And I think that's kind of the point here is that's capitalism. That's how capitalism works, is that monopolies are a natural outcome of capitalism. And I think the best that government can hope in most cases is to try to keep it at bay as long as possible. And eventually they're still going to get gobbled up and get eaten up. Your pharmacies had the same thing. Your internet providers had the same thing. I remember back in the 90s when I worked for an internet provider, you had, just in our area, probably 10 different internet carriers. Now you can't get internet from anybody other than Comcast here. You had 3 different cable companies that you could get service from. So it's just a life cycle, I think, of business in a capitalist society. So we're going to take another break and come back and talk more about our modern monopoly problem in America. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. with hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com. Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We're talking modern monopolies. So Forbes did an interesting article about America's modern monopoly problem. They said without realizing it, we become a nation of monopolies. A large and growing part of our economy is owned by a handful of companies that face little competition. They have no incentive to deliver better products or to get more efficient. They simply rake in cash from people who have no choice but to hand it over. This would be impossible if we had true capitalism. Even if we admit some businesses are natural monopolies, most aren't. Most of them found some non-capitalistic flaw to exploit. In theory, this problem should have solved itself as technology and consumer preferences change, yet it hasn't. Axios outlined a problem in a recent article on farm bankruptcies. Why don't you tell us about what they found?
Sure. So 3 companies control about 80% of mobile telecoms. 3 have 95% of credit cards. 4 have 70% of airline flights within the United States. Google handles 60% of all searches online. In agriculture, 4 companies control 66% of U.S. hogs slaughtered in 2015, 85% of the steer, and half of the chickens, according to the Department of Agriculture. And finally, just 4 companies control 85% of U.S. corn seed sales. That's up from 60% in 2000, so there was some consolidation there. And 75% of soybean seed, a jump from about half, according to the Agriculture Department.
That's pretty staggering, and that's not even talking big tech, where a lot of our focus is today. I mean, we're talking telecoms, credit cards, airlines, search, which we'll get to, and agriculture. I mean, our agriculture is really tied up to that few companies. I mean, I find that alarming at best. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you go back to your ocean spray example where it's one company, but it's made up of smaller farms. I guess that's probably similar.
That's
to what's
probably
happening.
would be in this, yeah.
Yeah, so it's if you want to have a successful farm, you have to join up with this company, basically is what you're getting at. And that is a monopoly, but if the independent farms are getting their proper cut, it's not as bad as it could be, right? Where they're just being exploited for their product.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. It's like this big company you just become a part of, I suppose, if you want to have a farm. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that they talk about a couple different outcomes that we get from this. One is being having a gummed up economy. Some economists say the concentration of market power is gumming up the economy and largely to blame for decades of flat wages and weak productivity growth. They say gumming up the economy is a good way to describe it because we're getting competition itself is an economic lubricant. And the machines work more efficiently when the parts are moving freely. We get more output from the same input or the same output with less input. Take away the competition and it all begins to grind together, kind of like a internal combustion engine that you don't keep the oil changed in. Eventually, friction brings it to a halt, and sometimes a fiery one. Normally, companies grow their profits by delivering better products at lower prices than their competitors. It's a dynamic process with competitors constantly dropping out and new ones appearing. This has been described as what's called creative destruction, which sounds harsh, but is absolutely necessary for economic growth. Today, the creative destruction isn't happening. And as companies refuse to die and monopolies refuse to improve, we struggle to generate even mild economic growth. And I think we're seeing that across our entire economy at this point in time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we just read off all those examples of all those companies that own everything, right? So I think especially when you get to the point where you're too big of a company to fail and it refuses to die, just like that article said, when you're at that level where you control over half of, some kind of domestic product, it's going to be difficult for you to fail, even if you wanted to. And then you end up getting the stagnation that we're seeing today.
Absolutely, yeah. They also talk about uncreative destruction. Creative destruction means companies go out of business and workers lose their jobs. Maybe a few competitors will hire them eventually, but they suffer in the meantime. Politicians try to help, but finding the right balance is hard. Greater blame should be assigned to the central bankers, not just the Fed, but its peers as well. For whatever reason, they kept short-term stimulus measures and near-zero rates for far too long. The resulting flood of capital bypassed the creative destruction process. A lot of this happened under the radar. You've probably seen stories about the Lyft IPO and other unicorns that will soon go public. Unicorns being a type of wishful company going public with very high IPO. The news. This is news because it's now so unusual. The number of listed companies is shrinking because A, cheap capital lets them stay private longer, and B, the founders and venture capitalists often exit by selling to a larger cash flush competitor instead of going public. An economy in which it's easier and cheaper to buy your competitors rather than out-innovate them is probably headed towards stagnation. And that's the problem that we had. We saw all through the 1800s, competition was being bought up constantly. The railroads, the consolidation in the auto industry in the early half of the 20th century. Anytime that you see competition just being eaten up by buying them out, you're not innovating at all when you buy. You just have companies that are so large they can buy out anybody that's competing with them. Facebook is doing the same exact thing now. Facebook has bought up 4 or 5 major competitors, all in different sectors of what they do, but they're buying their way to success, and that stifles innovation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we talked earlier about that barrier to entry, right? That's one of the biggest things when you're looking at these monopolies. And if you're a small startup trying to compete with somebody like Facebook and they just offer you a blank check to just buy you out, it's hard to say no to that, especially if you know that you have no real hope of competing with them. And I think that the more they when Facebook buys you out, they then also get more powerful because they have your workforce or your resources or whatever you had to offer, and they have less competition, so they only get more powerful. It's a win-win in the worst kind of way, I think, especially for consumers and the economy.
Yeah, and part of the problem that you have is because of this, you have companies that shouldn't be in business are getting bought out, and the technology they have is inferior technology, but you have larger companies buying them not because of the technology so they can integrate it into their own. They're buying their users. So you may have a company, I don't want to say Quibi, but a company like Quibi that spent all this money up front on advertising and we'll say technology, although it's not that revolutionary. But their whole goal was to basically get a whole bunch of people on the platform and then sell it. And in their case, they failed. In their case, they projected something like 70 million people signing on with this 1.5 billion budget or something that they had. They wound up getting 70,000 people actually subscribing to it, and they went out of business. That's the exception to the rule, whereas that should be the natural order of how business works.
Especially with capitalism. If you're not a good business, you should just fail.
Absolutely. But, instead you have companies that they garner this large following, and it could be because of certain people that might be on your service. One of the things that Twitter ran into was that when they banned Donald Trump around the time of the January 6th insurrection, their user base dropped off significantly because all of his supporters stopped using the service. That cult following is enough to start your own social network, bring all those people on board, and then sell those users. Even if the social network itself is outdated, the technology is 90 years old, they're selling eyes at that point in time. And that's generally not how business is done, because in most cases, traditionally, the consumer isn't the product.
Yeah.
The product is something you produce. Mm-hmm. But in the case of technology and social media today, the consumer is the product, because that's where people are making money with all your information. So it kind of breaks the rules, and that's why we kind of have an upset balance here. So we're going to take our last break here, and we're going to come back and look at the future of regulating monopolies and why tech might be different.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights Into Tomorrow. We're talking monopolies, and we're going to talk about how to regulate today's monopolies in tomorrow's market. So when the global financial crisis slowly subsided in the spring of 2010, tech giants Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, known collectively as GAFA.
I've never heard that before.
I haven't either. I didn't write the article, though. So. They were collectively valued at just under 450 billion euros by market cap. These companies were drivers of innovation that pointed the way forward, enterprises at the center of a flourishing technological ecosystem with a creative and technology-driven vision. Over the past decade, the transformation of society's relationship to those companies is unprecedented. We use the products of these companies to manage almost our entire professional and private lives. And during the coronavirus crisis, the value of the tech giants have increased even more. So when we put together the idea of the show, these were really the companies that we're talking about for today's modern monopolies. How do you feel about, first of all, let me ask, do you use their products? I think that's probably the most important question to ask anybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard not to, right? At least like Google and Amazon, even if you don't buy things from Amazon, Amazon still controls a lot of web traffic too for their searches. So you're using them either way. But yeah, I don't think I have any Apple products anymore. I did though for a while. I was an iPhone user. I have a Facebook and Instagram account. I don't really use, but I still look at them. So they're getting, my eyes either way. And then Google, I use all their products and services. So yeah, I'm pretty far in.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things to keep in mind here is that these companies don't just influence the American economy. These are global companies that have a major impact on the world. So looking at the monopolies of tomorrow, I think we have to ask ourselves probably a few questions and kind of come to terms with a few things. Like, one is how we handle the U.S. monopolies today will dictate Europe's future and even to a certain extent the rest of the world, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that in our modern age, it's a global economy. It's not as isolationist as it used to be with things like Standard Oil and things like that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that even though, it's hard to envision, but the technological revolution isn't over. We're kind of still in the early phases of it. And I think one of the issues that we run into is that we don't make the rules as fast as the technology grows. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, just in the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, you had Snapchat show up, which blew up again and became another staple in the social media icon, on your phone that a lot of people use and is now a publicly traded company. So I think that we're definitely going to see it again. TikTok as well, also huge. Yeah. So I think that, every couple of years, it's, just how these things work. You'll get a whole new social media app or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues that concerns me is that the room for maneuvering needed to figure all this stuff out is shrinking. The time that we have to put measures in place now to govern these things is running out rapidly. If we want to know what to do next, it's vital that we gain some in-depth understanding of the mechanisms by which the tech monopolies operate. And I think part of the problem that we have is that the people in our country, at least, that are making these laws don't have a clue about technology.
Yeah.
I mean, they really have no idea how it works, how it progresses, the impact that it has, the security. There's a lot of talk right now about cybersecurity because of the pipeline hack and all these, the Microsoft Exchange hack and the SolarWinds, all this stuff, this cybersecurity is in the news. And our politicians are trying their best, really, to pay lip service to it, but have no idea whatsoever what the technology means. Like, for instance, my biggest question, sticking with the pipeline incident, they got hit with ransomware. Well, why in the world was your pipeline network even connected to the internet? Absolutely no reason for that. And yet there isn't a single politician who's asked that question yet because they don't understand. They just think the internet is some nebulous piece of technology that connects everything. And these are the people that are making the laws. What do you think about that?
I think that's definitely part of the problem. I think you saw it too back when any new technology, when it showed up, like TV, like blew people's minds and they thought it was going to give you the devil in you. So I think it's something like this too. And eventually they'll hopefully catch up. But I think the difference with modern technology is that it's progressing way faster than things like TV ever did. I mean, it's changing almost on a yearly basis what the norms are. So I think that the pace is much more accelerated.
Yeah. So let's take a second to take a look at what the current tech monopolies are and why they're different. So I think the biggest thing, and we've touched on this already, is that tech monopolies survive on data and algorithms. That's their product. You as the consumer are their product. They take your information and they sell it for advertising. They're not necessarily selling you anything. Amazon doesn't make any money off anything that it sells from its store. It's literally a break even. It's a loss leader for them. They make their money on their Amazon Web Services, which everybody hosts everything through their Amazon Web Services, which ironically was kind of an offshoot for their own needs. They had to build out their own network to support the Amazon store. And they found out that they could rent space on their cloud and make more money. But Google, you're the product. They collect your data. Facebook, you're the product. Amazon, you're the product. With Apple recognized this, and now in the latest version of Apple's operating system, they implemented this new privacy feature where applications have to ask if you want them to track your movement outside the application. Which, if you think about it, is almost a no-brainer. Like, no, why do I want Facebook tracking me in other apps? But Facebook is actually fighting this to the point that they're threatening legal action because they're saying that it gives Apple an unfair advantage. So Apple has access to that information, but Facebook doesn't. So therefore, Apple has an advantage.
I mean, I guess, but it's like, geez, guys. It's like just the two crazy billionaires yelling at each other for more money.
If you look at the companies in the 20th centuries, their wealth came from factories and machines and qualified employees and the stuff that they made that consumers purchased. So it was much easier to say, okay, well, you're not innovating cars fast enough. You're not innovating refrigerators or whatever it happened to be because you had an actual defined product. How do you tell when you're not innovating services enough if the consumer's the product? Like what's the answer to that question?
I mean, then we get into a question of privacy, right? Because the only way to innovate that is to become more intrusive in people's lives and to collect more data on them. And then that's a whole nother can of worms of where you draw that line of if it's just, you're purely just a product at that point and the human element is completely removed.
Absolutely. So over the past decade, the big tech companies have built a huge competitive advantage because they control the operating systems and the search engines and the browsers and all the cloud infrastructure. They also own the shopping marketplaces, the communications platforms, the networked household appliances, and the app stores. To return to our picture of the 20th century, tech monopolies not only have factories and machines, they also increasingly own the entire infrastructure of the value creation chain, including all the businesses and all the communication channels to the customer, which, being that ingrained and essentially owning control of the economy, makes it almost impossible to regulate them. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like it's too late. It reminds me of, and this is sort of related, but movies. There was a big Paramount decision like the 30s because they owned distribution, production, and exhibition, which was like movie theaters.
Right.
And that's what this reminds me of. They're owning every single step of the chain, which is a monopoly. But in this instance, they're way too powerful to be stopped at this point.
Right. And, the capital that the big tech companies suck out of the system using this mechanism is fed straight back in undermining the competition or accessing new areas of business. Vendors on Amazon's marketplace are just as dependent on the goodwill of the platform as media companies are on Google and Facebook. This goodwill can only be acquired by consistently providing access to all content and data, thus continuing to feed the monopoly and making it more efficient. So even for competition to work, they have to cooperate with the big tech and provide the big tech exactly what they need to give the big tech the authority in the first place.
Competition in quotes there a little bit.
Exactly. So the enormous profitability of the infrastructure services allows the big tech companies to invest in new fields of business on a very long-term basis. To do this, the monopolists are willing to accept high losses for many years in order to weaken the competition and build up market shares. It's ironic what Amazon is doing because Amazon is doing online in the marketplace exactly what Walmart did. So Walmart had this reputation for buying everything in bulk and selling it very cheap with very little overhead. And they would come into a town and they would open up a mega store and they put all the other small mom and pop businesses out of business because they couldn't compete. Mm-hmm. They didn't have the economy of scale to compete with Walmart. Amazon now shows up, and they started out selling books at first, and they changed the way we bought books. Well, it wasn't long before they started selling everything. Mm-hmm. And now, not only do they sell everything, you can get it delivered in 2 days for free if you're an Amazon Prime member. You can get it delivered the next day if you're in certain geographic locations. They basically are putting companies like Walmart out of business because they can sell it cheaper than Walmart.
Yep. And that's not even counting all the other services they provide too. Their video streaming services as a competitor to Netflix. I mean, they're omnipresent.
Yeah. I mean, they're literally everywhere. They're in the music. Yeah. They're producing their own TV shows. They're producing their own movies that they're putting up for awards. They're selling goods. There's several situations Amazon's been involved in where they've had people on their service, because you can sell through Amazon. So they've had people on their service that were selling, I think one was diapers.com. Mm-hmm. They were selling low overhead diapers through Amazon. Well, Amazon decided that they were now going to sell diapers. And they would buy their diapers in much larger bulk than diapers.com could, and they would sell them at below cost. They could take the loss because they had plenty of other profit leaders elsewhere that they could absorb it through. And eventually they got to the point where they put this company out of business. And that's a practice that they've done over and over again And it isn't like diapers.com was bringing in so much money selling diapers that it was a threat to Amazon. So there was no reason to put them out of business. Amazon simply wanted to own that business, and now they do.
Yeah, I guess for them, even if there was a chance, a 1% chance that diapers.com could have taken over the diaper industry, they have to take that as an absolute certainty.
Yeah.
And they did.
And that's really what the scary thing is with these monopolies today, is that they have that ability. You know, they could literally give their products away for 6 months and put everyone else out of business so that they're the only one left after 6 months. They could absorb that loss. And now that bottle of water that cost you $1 before now cost you $10 because you don't have a choice, which is kind of scary. So let's talk a little bit about where we think the future of monopolies is going, and we can sort of sum up this discussion. So I jotted down a few talking points here. I want to bounce them off of you. My first point is that technology moves faster than legislation. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yeah, we already talked about that in terms of, I compared it to television, but yeah, absolutely. Especially today, it's moving even faster than, people in charge of making laws and politicians can even fathom.
Yeah. And today's monopolies are more complicated than railroads and telephones ever were. There's more of an international impact from today's monopolies than ever before. What kind of impact do you think that will have on regulating these companies that are too big to fail moving forward?
I think we're going to have to change the notion of a product, right? Because it's not a tangible thing that you can get. It's data, it's information that's being sold. So I think that's going to be the first step in really making some serious change on how to stop these monopolies, is changing what we view as, the product.
Do you think from a domestic standpoint that the U.S. government should be regulating these, or do you think we should be turning that sort of authority over to the World Trade Organization or something on a bigger scale?
I think the U.S. government should step in and then do it, because these are United States-based companies, and I think that there's a degree of responsibility there. Now, in reality, that's probably not going to happen because they have really no reason to, especially because, like we've said a bunch of times, that these companies are already way too powerful to be regulated. But maybe if, the World Trade Organization and the U.S. government, teamed up. I don't really know how that works in terms of law, but perhaps that level of force would get something done.
I could certainly see that. I could see, even if you go regionally with things like the European Union and stuff like that, where you might be able to regulate that. Let's talk penalties for a minute. So we already kind of talked about the fact that the penalties that are being imposed on these companies are really insignificant. How do you punish a company for monopolistic practices when they have economies larger than most countries in the world?
It's really hard to. I was thinking of something like when they broke up AT&T, but how are we going to break up Amazon, right? I mean, I guess you could do it where like they own Whole Foods, so Whole Foods would then become its own company again. Maybe something like that would work. Or all the different independent sellers that they've tried to acquire, like our diapers.com example, breaking those up and making them their own independent companies. But then logistically, they're not going to succeed because they're not on the Amazon app, which is what everybody's using. So it's a very difficult thing that, I'm not an economist, so I have no idea how you'd even begin. I mean, more money would be ideal, but like you said, they're bigger than some small countries. So how much money can you realistically find them? Right.
And the last thing that I want to throw out there is one that it seems to seep into every conversation that we have, and that's politics. You have governments that benefit too much from monopolies. The number of people that Amazon employs, the impact it has on the economy and the unemployment rate, and the amount of tax dollars that they get from these companies is vast. You have politicians whose constituents are benefiting by having, Amazon recently had a big competition about where they're going to put their new headquarters. And you had cities rather, that were vying for it, offering up, tax incentives and everything, almost like it was the Olympics, and you had people vying for the Olympics. They were politicians falling all over each other to try to get Amazon in their districts. When you have that kind of power, that you have politicians that are catering to you, And mind you, we talk about corrupt politicians and the fact that the United States has the best politicians money can buy all the time here. But when you have politicians that are falling all over themselves without you even gracing their palm with any money, just the fact that you're bringing that kind of business and economic benefit to their districts, how are you going to have these same politicians now regulate these companies and break them up and try to push some control over them? How do you get past the politics of it?
I mean, you don't really. I mean, this reminds me of, we studied a lot of around the Sherman antitrust time, those politics of that time in high school. And there was a lot of cartoons of like a big octopus that was Standard Oil that would like have its tentacles in politics. And this is kind of what that reminds me of. Except that I think today, while everybody knows about Amazon's like how poorly they treat their workers and things like that, and the accidents that have happened on the company lines, I still think Amazon is still viewed publicly very positively because of their convenience, right? So I think that that's going to be a major step too, because the politicians associated with Amazon aren't like as nefarious as they were when they were associated with Standard Oil. So it's a matter of public perception of even having the pressure on the politicians in the first place to make the change.
I think you're right. I mean, I'm a Amazon user.
Yeah.
I'm a Google user. I'm a Apple user. I don't use Facebook. The show's on Facebook, but I don't manage that. I don't log into Facebook. And the problem that I have is I know these companies are problems, but I still use them, and I will continue to use them. They're not evil enough for me to not. Facebook is evil enough. Facebook to me is a cesspool, so I won't use Facebook. But these other companies provide benefit to me, and I don't personally feel the detriment that's associated with them. So it's very hard for me to even advocate breaking them up or cracking down on them or whatever. So unfortunately, I don't have any answers myself.
Yeah, it's an interesting moral question, right? And I think we get that with a lot of industries. If you really look into them, they're all evil in their own ways.
Right.
But it's a matter of your daily life. And what's one person going to do that? If one person were to stop using this product, realistically, how many products would they have to stop using?
Yeah.
You have to stop using the internet probably if you wanted to stop benefiting Amazon.
That's true.
You cannot buy Amazon products, but you're still going to benefit them in some way. It goes back to their omnipresence.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think this is probably one of the first episodes that we've done where our future look didn't really have a path forward. I don't think either of us have an answer on how to solve this moving forward.
It's Wall-E. They're going to become by and large. We're going to have to fly off the planet because all the Amazon boxes are stacked up in the cities.
There you go. So I think that's kind of all we can add to this discussion today. I think that was all we had today. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nope.
Well, thank you for listening, folks. Before we go, I would invite folks to subscribe to the podcast. You can get video versions of the podcast if you look for Insights into Things. That will give you video episodes of all of our shows. If you just want audio episodes of this show, you can look up Insights into Tomorrow. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Google.
Whoops.
Yes, all those evil people.
Yeah.
I would also encourage folks to contact us. You can give us some suggestions on what topics you'd like us to discuss, any feedback on the performance that we've done. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We're on Twitter at insights_things. We stream 5 days a week, this week 6 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. If you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you do get a free Twitch Prime monthly subscription. We'd appreciate it if you threw that our way. On Facebook, we are facebook.com.
Should have plugged the shows in the beginning.
Yes, we are part of the problem. I understand that. We have no other, that's another byproduct of the monopolies. We have no other way to get our products out there without using them. But on Facebook, you can get us at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. And on Instagram, we are at Insights Into Things, or you can go to our website at www.insightsintothings.com for links to all of those things. Anything else before we go? Any closing thoughts?
No, I think that's it.
All right. The world is owned by the monopolies. It's a good game, too. You should try playing it. That's all for this week, this month, or whenever we do another one. Any closing words?
No, we'll see you next time, folks.
That's it. Another one in the books. Goodbye.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com. Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 14, The Specter of Student Debt. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hello, everyone.
How you doing today, Sam?
Doing great. Can't wait to talk about student debt.
As someone who is a victim of it, I think you probably are the best subject matter expert we've ever had on any of our shows.
If I'm an expert, I don't know that much about it. So, I mean, I owe them. I know that. So that's much I know.
Well, you might not be an expert, but you're definitely a victim of it. So this week, we are talking about the pandemic of student debt. Why is it a problem in the United States? We'll talk about a brief history of student debt, and we'll take a look at what's driving the rise in student debt these days. And then we'll take a look at possible solutions to this problem plaguing today's youth and what the future of student debt looks like. Before we do that, though, I would invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can get audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. Video versions of all the network's podcasts can be found listed as Insights into Things. We are listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Amazon, pretty much any place you can get a podcast these days. I would also invite everyone to give us your feedback. Write in, tell us how we're doing, give us your suggestions for topics you'd like us to talk about. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can get us on Twitter at insights_things. On Facebook, we are facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. On Instagram, we are at Insights Into Things, or you can get links to all those on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. Ready to get into it?
Yep.
All right. So what is student debt? There is a ton of research out there, or a ton of information, I should say, out there that I came across in doing the research for today's show. Most of what we're going to talk about today comes from firstrepublic.com. They say student debt plays a significant role in the lives of many Americans. The cost associated with higher education continues to increase year over year, and for many, this translates to a heavier reliance on loans to bridge the gap. Consequently, outstanding U.S. student loan debt reached $1.7 trillion at the end of 2020, according to the Federal Reserve, which is an all-time high. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the GDP ranking of Canada, the 10th highest ranked country in the world by GDP. How does, like, that number to me is just astronomical. Mm-hmm. What's the impact of that number to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's just like you said. Once you get past, like, honestly, like 100, it's hard for me to fathom that number. But when we talk about trillions, it's like when you look at the national debt too. It's just these numbers are astronomical. You can't even wrap your head around them. Yeah. Let alone the notion of being able to pay that off, which is just, it seems impossible.
Yeah, but the thought that if we wanted to pay off the national student debt right now, that's more money than Canada can generate in a year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, it's ridiculous.
It's a great way to intro the topic too, framing it in that, like how big of a beast it is. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it seems, when you talk in numbers that size, it seems kind of insurmountable, really.
So we have a couple other student loan debt statistics. The national average per student is about $39,000. The states with the highest student loan debt, number one coming in is Washington, D.C. Their average student loan debt is $54,400 a year. Just below that is Maryland with $42,700. Age groups with the most student loan debt are 18 to 29-year-olds. 34% of that age group have student loan debt, which makes sense because they're people either going into college or coming out of it. More than half of college-educated adults have student loan debt. That's 65% of people. 6% of borrowers who owe more than $100,000 in student loan debt, including the 2% owing more than $200,000, account for a third of all outstanding student loan debt. So a lot of people owing a lot of money. The vast majority of those borrowers who owe more than $100,000 took out loans for graduate school. Loans associated with grad school account for about 50% of the outstanding student loan debt. The other half belongs to the 75% of borrowers who took out loans for 2 or 4-year degrees. And then finally, the U.S. student debt has increased by more than 100% over the past 10 years. So we're looking at, the numbers are only getting higher, and that's why we have the highest in 2020 with $1.7 trillion.
And that's another, alarming statistic, to have anything go up 100% over the course of 10 years.
Yeah.
Has the quality of your education increased at the same proportional rate?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I've only been in college for 3 years now. I'm going into my senior year. But that large amount of increase, it seems impossible that there would be a reflection in education that would meet that as well.
Yeah. And the business side of me looks at this and wants to say, all right, what's the cost benefit analysis? If I'm paying 100% more over the last 10 years, is the salary that I'm taking when I come out of that college raising 100% more? And statistically, it's not. Salaries are not keeping pace with the current economic scale.
Yeah.
So you're paying all this much more for an education, but you're not getting the compensation on the back end of that to justify that cost. So there's a massive loss of investment here. Like, how long do you think you're going to be in debt with college debt?
I mean, judging by what I'm seeing now with my bills and things for the years, I'm probably in that average, $40K range for what I'm going to owe back. The bigger question is, I'm going into a field that hopefully I'll find a job quickly. I'm planning on going into the radio field, anything like that. So hopefully I'll find a job and they'll just garner my wages. That's going to be my plan, essentially. Now, I know some people that are going into medical field, so they're going into grad school, so that's half of those loans there that people owe. And those jobs are obviously, you end up spending a lot more and you end up owing a lot more debt, but you're pretty much guaranteed a job because the world always needs doctors and whatnot.
Right.
So I think it really depends on just what you're looking to do post-college and how long you want to stay in school and then how much you're going to pay too.
Well, and like I look at it from I don't know, I kind of try to tie it to more everyday things. So I think, okay, what's the next closest thing I have to a $40,000 debt? And I think, okay, if I buy a car and I finance a car, I'll finance a car for 5 years. After 5 years, 3 years maybe, depending on how much of a monthly payment I want to do. But let's say 5 years is pretty much, I think, on average. I'll pay my car off after 5 years. Are you going to have your student loan debt paid off after 5 years?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not, no.
And you look at student loan debt when it comes to your postgraduate schools, where you're looking at around $200,000 in debt that you're going to have. So now you're looking at the cost of a mortgage. Mm-hmm. So even if I look at it from a mortgage standpoint, I'm going to pay that over 30 years. So are you going to finance your student debt over a 30-year period?
I mean, I know people that are in their 40s and even 50s and that are still paying off their student debt. And that, I mean, sure, that's a financial question because it's going to depend on your income and your ability to make those payments. But it can go that long, and especially it's going to depend on what level of education you decided to go with.
So let's stay on that topic just for a second there. So if I go to get a mortgage and I'm buying a $200,000 house, I have to have an established credit history. I have to have an established income, and I have to prove that I'm not a credit risk for them to give me a loan. And depending on how risky I am, determines what my percentage rate is. What, as a student, did you have to produce to show that you're not a credit risk when it came to getting loans for school?
Well, often they have your parents co-sign, which helps because then they become responsible for that debt too, and that kind of lends credibility to you. I applied to college, so I don't know how it works for grad school because I don't have any, aspirations of going down that path. But it wasn't as rigorous as a test as that of
right.
Going for a mortgage. It was much more apply to the school, get into the school. Okay, you're pretty much you can just get loans, and there's not
right.
that long of a approval process. It's more about how much you make, so that we know how much to give you.
And I think that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make here is that. The process itself isn't nearly as rigorous as it is to make sure you're not a credit risk, to make sure you're capable of paying it back. Mm-hmm. There's almost an assumption of, we'll pay us whatever we ask for, and then we'll make sure you get an education and get a good job that you can pay that back.
Yeah, and I imagine it probably is designed that way because people going into college, they don't want to think about after college when they're going to have to pay all this back. They want to get their education. They want to, if they have a career in mind, they want to get to that as fast as possible. So they'll take any loans they have to.
Sure. And I think one of the indirect consequences of this is that you're seeing the number of people that choose to go into a vocational profession significantly increasing over those that are going to college.
I thought about that. I mean, my freshman year in college, I took mostly gen eds. And I was like, this is not what I want to do. So I started looking at broadcasting schools, and I seriously considered it in my sophomore year, transferring and just going to broadcasting school because, going to broadcasting school because a lot of the people that I look up to in the area that are broadcasters either didn't go to college or went to broadcasting school, and it just seemed like that's exactly what I want to do. Why not just do that? Right. But I ended up rethinking it because just having the degree. You talk yourself into it. Yeah. And I'll probably talk more about that later, but just the mindset of kind of just accepting debt as a notion, right. You kind of just become okay with it.
And I had a friend of mine, her son, they had groomed him for going to college all through his high school career, his grades and all the extracurricular stuff and the clubs and all that stuff. And when he got to his senior year in high school and saw how much it was going to cost, he realized he couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to be in debt for, the majority of his life.
Right.
So he decided instead of going to college for accounting or business administration or whatever, he was going to be an electrician. And he went off and he went through a vocational school. He joined a guild and, is under an apprenticeship now. And he's making more now within less than 4 years of the time he would have spent in college. He's making more now than if he'd come out of college with a 4-year degree. And he's just starting out in his profession without all that debt.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it depends on, we get into deeper questions of how do you measure success? What do you want from your educational career? And I think that once you figure out those answers for yourself, then you can kind of decide, do I really need college? Do I really need to do this?
Right.
In my case, yes. But in that guy's case, no, he didn't need to do that. If he enjoys being an electrician and he gets satisfaction from that work, there's no reason for him to go to college. He can do exactly what you said and not have to worry about debt, which is almost not unheard of, but rare.
Yeah.
At least with my generation.
And it's a very valid point you make that it's very situational and very specific to the individual.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the intro to the topic that we're talking about. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to look at a brief history of how student debt has evolved in the United States.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We're talking student debt today. So let's just take a quick brief history of what student debt has looked like in the United States. Student debt really didn't come into being until around 1840. The first student loans in the U.S. were offered exclusively to students at Harvard in 1840. Public student loans didn't arise until the 20th century. So it's kind of a whole new concept as far as taking loans to go to college. And, the instance of people going to college didn't really increase too much until around the 1940s. So in the 2 decades prior to the institution of federally guaranteed student loans, the U.S. experienced a significant increase in college attendance, thanks in part to the GI Bill in 1944. So fulfilling the need for affordable higher education, the GI Bill subsidized, or in some cases completely covered, the cost of college education for nearly half the Americans returning from World War II. We jump forward to 1972, and the HEA was amended to ensure, the HEA being the something that was up top there that I didn't talk about. The Higher Education Act of 1965. Sorry.
Everybody knows it. It's one of the big bills.
Yeah. If you're listening to this show, you should already know that. So the Higher Education Act was amended to ensure that education programs whose students were receiving financial assistance and student loans did not discriminate based on gender.
I'm sure they didn't discriminate based on anything else.
It's an evolving process, okay? So by 76, 77, all undergraduate students became eligible for Pell Grants. Together, these two popular programs further increased college attendance rates by providing financial assistance to individuals who previously could not obtain it. So the focus so far at that point was not controlling student debt, not controlling the cost of education. It was making education more available to those who wouldn't be able to do it because of discriminatory practices or financial difficulties and stuff like that. So up until the 1970s, mid to late 70s, the drive really was to enable students at that point.
Yeah, so looking into the 80s now, these are when things sort of start to turn sour. 1986, parents and students had incurred nearly $10 billion in federal student loans, which is funny now that we're up to $1.7 trillion.
Yeah, $10 billion is a drop in the bucket, right?
Then considered an outrageous amount. That same year, more than 1/4 of student borrowers owed more than $10,000 in student loan debt. Adjusting for inflation, that's about $21,000 today. So this is sort of where you start to see that this is sort of getting out of hand. And into the 1990s, student loan debt begins to skyrocket. In 1993, the average debt of a bachelor's degree was approximately $9,000, and within just 5 years, it was $15,000, and by 2003, it was almost $20,000, coming in at $17,500. And then finally into the 2000s, today the average loan debt, which we already mentioned, is roughly $30,000. Though one recent study by the Fidelity Investments puts that figure closer to $35,000. Approximately 20% of U.S. households currently owe student loan debt, as do 40% of people younger than 35, which is kind of wild. Almost half of people younger than 35 owe student debt. This means an increase of nearly 200% of overall student loan debt over the last 20 years. 200% in just 20 years. As of 2012, total student debt has surpassed $1 trillion.
And that's astronomical. It really is, just that growth rate. Now, my first question there is, what's driving that cost increase? Is it the cost of education? Is it the financing side of things? Where would you pin the blame there?
I mean, I don't really understand economics, but it seems like if more people are going to be able to get an education, then from a business standpoint, because colleges are businesses, then their market base is wider, right? So they can drive up that cost. And especially once college becomes a social norm where you're just expected to go to college, essentially, then that ensures their business model even more because people want to go to college. They can charge whatever they want.
Well, yes, to a certain extent, I agree with the principle of economies of scale here. So back in the 1870s, when, maybe 2% of the population went to college educations should therefore have been exceedingly expensive. But now when you have such a large percentage of people that are, think of the Ford Model T, okay? So prior to mass production of automobiles, they were very specialized, very hand-built, very unique. A couple of them rolled off the plant per month. So as a result, they were very expensive to cover your overhead. Well, when the Model T comes around and you're rolling hundreds of these off the assembly line per day, you can now produce them, thanks to economies of scale, you can produce them much cheaper and then distribute that overhead cost across many more customers. And I would have thought that same model would have translated into your education system, where the more students you have, the lower that tuition rate should be, logically.
That'd be nice. It doesn't seem like it went that way, though. I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that. I guess because as the debt numbers increase, too, does that allow for, are the higher tuitions not really questioned because it just happens so quickly over time? I don't know. It would be nice if that logic applied, where if the more people went to college, the cheaper it was, but it seems like it's the opposite.
It does. And then I have to take a look at what's the cost of college. What has gone up so dramatically for a college education? Is it technological advancements? Is it the cost of campuses? Is it property related? Like, what has happened in the last 20 years at your local college that would make it so much more expensive to go?
I'm not sure. I mean, if they're dealing with more money, maybe they just feel they need to spend more money on things that maybe they don't necessarily need, new facilities that might look nice and might provide for people that use them, but do we really need them? Or large structures, like parking garages and things like that. Are these things necessary? And maybe they're just spending that money because they have it. And that encourages the need for more money to keep doing that. I don't know.
Like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That makes a lot of sense. And I also have to look at these colleges that are very athletically driven. Mm-hmm. All your Big Ten colleges and your Ivy League colleges where you're bringing in a significant income from the sports and athletics that are happening at your college. Why isn't that going into lowering the cost of tuition for your students?
Yeah. I mean, we could do a whole other show on college sports like that. I mean, they just had the NCAA ruling where they can get money from their image, which is nice, but
but the school still can't pay them.
Yeah, yeah. And the school's still getting a ton of money, especially big schools like that.
Right.
Just on like the broadcast rights alone.
And that's what blows my mind is they're bringing in money hand over fist to the point that you've got college stadiums that are more well appointed than professional stadiums these days.
Yeah, I don't know. When I look at it, I look at it very cynically, and it just seems like these are businesses first and educational institutions second, and they are very greedy.
Yeah.
And it just seems like they want to get as much money as possible out of people.
So Forbes did do a study on what's driving the increases in higher education. Now this study was done September of 2020. And their conclusion, college is expensive.
Good work, Forbes.
That was helpful. They said since the 1999 to 2000 academic year, the net price of tuition, fees, room and board at a public four-year college has increased 68%. 68% in 20 years. That's insane. The amount borrowed to go to college each year has doubled in the same time. And today, the cumulative federal student loan debt is over